And I'm sending
Oh,
the
can you give me a link?
tweets. Oh, you want a link?
Okay.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear us and see us and all that other good
Smell
stuff.
us.
Yeah. Can I turn on focus assist? How do I do that? Oh, yeah, there we go. Windows 11, it's new to me. Right, hopefully we are going. This is coming from the laptop studio today, so if it's not working, that's going to be a problem. I think we should be fine.
Hello, Zoe. No one's here.
I'm very nervous. Well, we were supposed to do the show on Tuesday, but we didn't.
Wonder why.
Yes. Mark says he smells Neo news. Not on this podcast, you don't. We have nothing to share on the Neo. And neither does Microsoft, so. Right, let me retweet the tweet and then I'm ready to start.
Two more seconds. All right. Weird. Can't resize that as much. All right. NVIDIA broadcast. Recording. I am now recording.
I am now recording as well.
3, 2, 1. Welcome to the Windows Central Podcast, episode 243 for October 7th, 2021. Hey everyone, Daniel Rubino joined with Zach Bowden for another exciting episode of the Windows Central Podcast. A little bit of a special edition. We were going to do this on Tuesday, but then I was just too tired and couldn't do it, mentally not there. So we're doing it on Thursday because then Zach took off Friday. So we're doing it now, but in case you're wondering, we're focusing on just a few things in this podcast, this episode, specifically the Windows 11 launch/review that Zach did. And then we'll also be talking about all those new Surface devices, including Surface Pro 8, Surface Laptop Studio, and I'll say a sentence or two about Surface Laptop Go 3, which is all that is deserving of that one. I do have a review for Go 3 coming, likely Monday, but Pro 8 and Laptop Studio, if you haven't read those yet, grab yourself a coffee and read the over 10,000 words dedicated to those reviews. And then towards the end of the podcast, we'll of course take your questions regarding those devices and Windows 11. Zach, how are you doing on this fine Thursday, I should say?
I am very tired. It's been a busy week. I think you can agree.
Yes. I have caught up on sleep and showers. I think I showered twice in 5 days.
Yeah.
Listen, I did 12,000 words in 3 days, which is a new record for me. And I have like about 5 articles left to write for next week. So it's exhausting, but it's fun exhausting because we love doing this stuff. So it's definitely worth it. I guess let's get right to it. Windows 11 came out. You did a review. I got ice cream. I think I won out on this deal, by the way. But I guess I can't share my ice cream with anyone here. If you don't know, Microsoft sent out to some of us a special blend of ice cream called Bloomberry.
They did.
I haven't tried it yet.
You've not tried it? It's been days. It's probably out of date.
Yeah. I'm going to sell it. I'm going to sell it on eBay.
Yeah.
But I guess take us into the review, Windows 11, the rollout. The rollout was interesting because it technically started on the 4th.
Yes.
For us, but that's because Microsoft technically was doing a rolling rollout to actually make it on the 5th for everyone. So why don't you walk us through all that?
Yeah, so to dive into that a bit more, to match the October 5th launch date, they began rolling out on October 5th in New Zealand, I guess. So New Zealand was the first to reach that day. And by, I guess, in addition to that, because they were rolling it with each new day as each country got October 5th, if you were in the US, for example, you could just go and download the media creation tool on October 4th and you could have the final bits. So technically it rolled out on October 4th for those who wanted to get it straight away. However, if you're waiting for the Windows 11 update through Windows Update, you may have got it on October 5th, or you may even still not have it, because as Microsoft usually does, this is a phased and measured rollout. So only a small selection of devices get it on day 1, and then on day 2 a few more, and then on day 3 a few more kinds of devices, and so on and so on and so on. And this will continue up until mid 2022. So if you don't have it today and you want to get it through Windows Update, you'll have to keep waiting. At some points between now and the middle of next year, Windows 11 will be made available to you to download through Windows Update, and then from then you can decide to accept the download and install it, or deny it and not have to upgrade to Windows 11. You have to remember this is an optional update. Microsoft is not planning to force it upon everybody. So good news if you don't like Windows 11. But yes, that's kind of what's happening with the rollout. Quite kind of interesting. But again, you can, if you really want it right now, you can force it onto your PC by going to the Windows 11 upgrade tool, which is on Microsoft's website, and running that. That will pull the download and install it for you today if you really want it. And regarding whether or not you should want it today or not, we did the review, as Dan mentioned. I wrote about 6,000 words, which I thought was pretty good for this OS. We did miss out on some stuff because there's just too much to talk about, really. But we talked about the main focuses of the operating system, like the new start menu, the taskbar experiences, the new apps, widgets, Teams chat, etc., etc. And I think the takeaway, really, that the TLDR is it's a promising start for a new era of Windows. However, if you're a power user of Windows or a long-time Windows user who's very familiar and intricate with all of its quirky, complicated features and functions, Windows 11 is going to be a learning curve for you, because Microsoft's goal with Windows 11 was to sort of strip things back and simplify the UX to the point in which in some areas it's kind of annoying. The taskbar is a perfect example of this. The taskbar on Windows 11 is beautiful. I think it looks great. However, functionally, it isn't as complicated as the Windows 10 one. The right click menu, for example, is one option now. No longer do you get cascading window options or toolbars or the ability to enable or disable the different system icons. It's just one option, which takes you into settings now. The taskbar itself can no longer be moved around the screen, so you can't have it at the top, which I know lots of people like. And you also can no longer drag files into an app icon to drop it into that app. You have to arrange the windows side by side first to do that, which is really annoying. That's the biggest issue for me. But yeah, lots of functional regressions to the taskbar, but from the design perspective, it looks great. I think this is the best looking taskbar they've done. Start menus, it's sort of similar position. The start menu is very simple now. It's just an app launcher, similar to iOS and Android. You have a grid of apps, you click on an icon, it launches the app. Below that, you get like a mini timeline UI, which has recent documents and stuff, which I find kind of useful, though I would like some filtering options, because there's some stuff that shows up there that I'm never going to want to access again, and I'd love to be able to filter out certain file types or documents altogether. Like I don't use Excel enough to want Excel documents showing up in the recents feed on the start menu. So it would be great if I could say to the start menu, okay, don't show me any Excel spreadsheets, because I'm not going to need them again once I've opened them. The biggest issue I've seen people have with the new start menu, and I agree to an extent, is that it's kind of static in how it's laid out. Like, it's 3 grids of pinned apps and then the recommended feed, and you cannot change that. If you disable the recommended feed, there's just a blank space in the start menu, and the grid doesn't expand to take up that space, or vice versa. So they need to really improve the start menu in that way. But if you're fine with the start menu as is, and you actually utilize all of its new features, I think it's great. Like, I'm actually using the feed at the bottom there, for example, so I don't have any complaints with the fact that the recommended feed doesn't disappear if you turn it off. But for those who don't want that sort of thing, that's going to be a problem for you as well. So it's certainly, there are trade-offs all over Windows 11. If you're a huge fan of design and simplicity, Windows 11 is going to be an excellent upgrade for you. If you're more into Windows's openness and the ability to customize every small thing, to a insane detail, that is not what Windows 11 is, at least not yet. This is a version 1 product, of course, so we expect Windows 11 to be updated throughout the course of next year, with the next big update coming in the second half of 2022. And I assume that update will address many of the issues and functional regressions that version 1 has, especially around the taskbar. I think the taskbar is going to be a key area of focus for them with the second version of Windows 11 next year. Dan, I know you've been using Windows 11 since June, I suppose. How are you finding the release build?
Yeah, we've talked about this in the past where this is why you do reviews of operating systems now, because my eye for detail is just not there. I'm a very top level, I just see it, I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Even the start menu, a lot of people have gripes with the start menu. For me, that's like, who uses start?
Right, yeah.
Real pros just search. They just use the search thing and just start typing with their app. Like I didn't use start for Windows 10. I didn't use start for Windows 11. And I only used it on Windows 8 because sometimes that was the only interface you had to do anything on it. So I don't really find this idea of like start menu. I get it if someone relies on it all the time. I just don't launch apps from start, period. So I don't care about that stuff. I think it looks fine. And when I click on it, and I actually like the recents because I do write across devices. So to have like my last document or even images I've been editing or something like that show up there is actually kind of cool. I actually really kind of like that. And you really get the benefits working cross device, I think. But in terms of stability, it's been rock solid. Of course, I run it on more modern hardware, but that's the goal. When people criticize Microsoft's hardware requirements for this, part of that was they're like, on the computers that we've designated as Windows 11 ready, they have a 99% like crash-free experience. And that drops dramatically down when they go to the older processors. Why that is, could they have fixed that? I don't know. That's way above my pay grade, that's for sure, in my engineering. But that's the experience. And I don't really blame them for that because Microsoft has two big criticisms when it comes to, actually three. One is security. Apple and Google still rag on them, even in commercials to this day. I see the Chromebook ads all the time. You don't need to run a virus scanner. Yeah. So they're always like, so they have an image issue with security. So they want to make sure that's a key feature of this, and that does require some new hardware. The other thing is stability. Blue screen of death. It's BSOD. Like it's its own cultural meme up there with Clippy, right? So they want to combat that. So they're doing that with Windows 11. And the third one I would mention is complexity, which is something you've addressed now, talk about the regression sort of and some of the stuff that, they were trying to simplify the operating system and to make it less complicated. Doesn't mean they can't add stuff back on. I've said this theory before about no matter how simple an OS is, it always gets more complicated. So where people used to be like, oh, Mac OS is so easy. When I fire up Mac OS today, I'm like, what is going on? I have no idea what this is. Same with iOS, right? So I do believe complexity will come back to this. But for right now, they wanted something streamlined, focusing on the stuff that's important in 2021 that wasn't as important in 2015, including Teams. I don't really like the Teams thing yet.
Me neither.
That's in the taskbar. Considering they announced last week doubling down on Skype, which I'm all for. Like, listen, I like Skype. And I don't think Skype and Teams right now completely overlap for consumers. I feel like Teams is overkill. But I would have liked, instead of having Teams in the taskbar, to have Skype there instead. I think that would have been a little bit more cool. Yeah. But yeah, in terms of the complexity and all that stuff, I like it when you'll appreciate a center layout for the taskbar. If you ever go to an ultra wide screen monitor, it's godsend. It's like, and that's, again, that's reflective of how people are using computers these days. If you want to tell me, want me to tell you a trend in desktop computing, it's ultra wide displays. Some people still use dual displays and triple. That's still a thing, but I've converted over to preferring sort of ultra wides myself, and that's where it's center. But you can move it back, right? You can justify it
Yeah.
left if you want to. And then we should mention, Stardock. Stardock, the company for people who refuse to change, has Start 11, which gives you back the old start menu, and they always do this, right? So you can but that's the beauty of Windows. You can do basically whatever you want with it. So whatever limitations are there now, In terms of it not being finished, no OS is finished. Name me an OS. Because last I checked, Mac OS just had a big update. Why is it not finished?
I will comment on that, because I think what a lot of people refer to when they say not finished is, specifically this time around, they're talking about the UI. Because Windows 10 had an incomplete UI throughout its life cycle, but it was kind of just how it was in Windows 10, because it was so inconsistent everywhere that the inconsistency sort of became its UI. Whereas on Windows 11, Microsoft has very clearly tried to fix that problem and try to make it consistent where it can. And that's why the inconsistencies now stand out even more. Like, for example, you try to change the volume on your PC and a Windows 8 UI pops up. And it's very obviously out of place now. Whereas on Windows 10, it kind of wasn't. It was sort of... Sure, it wasn't a Windows 10 design. However, because Windows 10 design was an iteration of Windows 8, it kind of still fit in, even though as somebody who follows Windows, it wasn't supposed to be there. Same with things like when you plug in a USB and that autoplay thing comes up now. That's a Windows 8 UI as well. Some of the menus on the lock screen are still Windows 8 UIs, and it's
open defaults.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's still Windows 8, and it's still easy to fall into those old UIs. I think a lot of people are expecting Microsoft to be a bit more vigorous when it comes to updating those UIs, and they weren't. And I think simply they've run out of time. They had a very strict October launch time frame for this version of the operating system. Had they pushed it back 6 months, they would have missed this whole pandemic working from home thing, because let's be honest, they're kind of late to that already. I think a lot of people are returning to the office at this point. Not everybody, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people are sort of back to normal life, air quotes. And Microsoft really wanted Windows 11 out as a sort of response to the pandemic, and so they need to get it out now. If they waited 6 months or another year, that marketing angle, that whole idea is out the window. And then they're back to like, I guess we're just doing Windows 11 now. So that's why it's out now, and it's not a problem. I think as long as they address this sort of second layer of UI inconsistencies for the next release for 22H2, I'm willing to accept it. But if that continues beyond that, then that's when it becomes a problem for me.
I don't disagree with that. I just look at it as this way, like, for one, Windows 11 was basically built during the pandemic remotely by a lot of people, which is insane. And they kind of did it within a year, because this, there was Windows 10X that was the mission, and then it changed. And granted, they took a lot of the UI work they did in 10X, brought it to 11, but that still wasn't like a skin update. Just refresh. So that required a lot of work. So I think they not only did they accomplish a lot in a year for what was basically an unpredicted OS upgrade, it feels way more complete and stable to me than Windows 10 did when it launched, which was really incomplete.
Right.
On top of that, and I keep stressing this, where Windows 10 definitely had a vision to it, under Terry and stuff, Terry Myerson, and they had the phone aspect and in Xbox, and it kind of felt like that they had something there. This feels still a little bit more unified, coherent, and like there is an actual planning vision of like stuff. And I don't mean to throw the Windows 10 people under the bus, but this one just feels a little bit more comprehensive. Like even the sound profile was redone, right? And it's such like, okay, so they added new sounds, but it really changes the experience in the animations, because this operating system now is a lot more calming to use. Even the background wallpaper. This is the first time I've been switching and using the default Windows wallpapers over my own choices on new devices. And it's just I really do kind of dig it. But it gives a more calming, peaceful, streamlined effect to the operating system. And I think that's the right thing at this time we need, because our digital lives are so stressful, a lot of it because of social media, right? But the world we live in, being always connected, where I find just using Windows 11 feels calming. And they did that on purpose, and I kind of just really appreciate that. But yeah, you're right. I mean, when people bring up like the old control panel stuff is still there, right?
Yeah.
Like, I shrug, like, yeah, it true, but the 90% of the operating system is completely new, refreshed, and you have like Edge keeps getting updated, and they're bringing it more in line. Like all their, I think they had more of their premium and like top tier apps updated this time too.
Yes,
right?
oh for sure. Yeah, I was gonna say like you mentioned coherence and how it feels more coherent than Windows 10 did at launch. It reminds me a lot of the Windows 8 launch, which that operating system was in a similar position. Like they had this entire new UI, which if you were able to maintain yourself within that UI, it was completely consistent and it was beautiful, it was fluid, it was fast. And then, but you'd tap on one button or you'd click on a thing, and it would take you back to that old desktop UI. That's sort of where Windows 11 is right now. It's like if you're able to do it, you can remain within the modern UI that is new to Windows 11. Oh, you click on one thing, whether that be the volume key on your keyboard or you plug a USB in or something or other. You can find yourself back in that old interface, and that will be fixed eventually. Like Windows 8 never fixed it because it just couldn't. That was too big of a job for them to fix. Windows 10 sort of merged it all together, which is why that was the most inconsistent UI of all time. And then Windows 11 is trying to sort of take it all back and go, right, let's smooth this all over with one design language. And they are almost there. Like as you mentioned, Dan, it is pretty much mostly consistent. It's 90% consistent at this point. But yes, there are areas where it still is inconsistent. And because it's now 90% consistent, that 10% stands out even more, which is why they need to address it. And I'm sure they will. I think they will get around to it. It's easy for them to tackle now that most of it's been tackled.
Yeah, agree. But yeah, I mean, so far it's been running well. We should mention, I've got to, at the top of the show, Zach and I are taking a big risk doing this podcast right now. We are both on Surface Laptop Studio.
Yes.
Granted, it's a 32 gig version with 1 terabyte storage and all of that kind of stuff. I'm actually using the one with the A2000 GPU. He's using the 3050 Ti GPU. It's basically the same. Technically, mine's a little faster.
All right.
But it doesn't really show up in benchmarks that much. The risk, of course, is, so Zach's got his stuff plugged in. He's just using straight microphone
and a webcam
to the USB-C.
Yep.
And what else? Do you have any?
No, yeah. So I've got the microphone plugged into the USB-C Travel Hub by Microsoft because that's a USB-A connection. Then I have the Logitech Brio 4K plugged directly into the other USB-C port on the Laptop Studio.
Got it. I'm using, so that's the simple setup Zach's got. I'm doing something for the team here, but I was also curious, and I guess we'll talk more about this when we get into the hardware, because I don't know, we're not done with Windows 11, right?
No, we're not. There's a couple more things I want to mention.
Okay, yeah. I just want to mention that I'm running a very crazy setup with an eGPU and a dock and all that. So I'm going to bring this up because if this podcast crashes, that is why. But so far, it's holding up well. Of course, I probably just jinxed it, but fingers crossed we're coming across well. Anyways, continue with your Windows 11.
Yeah, so just a couple more things. I do want to mention the widgets thing, which is also new to Windows 11. I'm not a fan. Microsoft positions it as this sort of thing like, oh, you're working, you're doing stuff, but then sometimes you want just a moment of just, you don't want to be working for a moment. So just slide in your widgets panel and then you can have the latest news. You can see the weather or your photos from OneDrive, and you can just sort of be taken away from your work for 5 minutes before you have to get back to doing what it is you need to be doing. I've never used the widgets panel in that way. It's a nice idea, but its implementation, I'm not a fan of. It's this web technology. It's kind of slow, and the selection of widgets is very short. I think there's 8 widgets total, 4 of which may be useful at most. The rest are sort of just fluff. I call it essentially fluff. Then, of course, below that, you get the sort of Microsoft Start newsfeed, which, I use a Surface Duo every day, which has the Microsoft Start newsfeed built in. I never use it, and this is going to be the same thing here as well. It's a thing that Microsoft is trying to push as an idea that I'm sure a very small group of people will find actually very useful, but for the majority of people, this will be something they turn off, and I'm part of that group who will be turning this off. It's not a feature for me. Like I said, the idea is nice, but I think the widgets aspect of it is very shallow. It's not thought out. It's not very in depth. Right now, only Microsoft can add widgets to it. I believe they told press that developers would be able to add widgets to it eventually.
Right.
They didn't give a timeline for that, and who knows whether developers actually.
We didn't get the full screen.
Yeah, the full screen feature isn't there either. But who knows if and when developers are allowed to build widgets for this, will they come? Probably not, because they never developed for live tiles.
But to be fair, how many would we really need to be useful?
Well, the problem I have with it is that I'm not going to swipe into it. That's just the thing. That's the issue I have with it.
That's what I was going to mention was like, it is a weird thing. This is a weird idea in the sense where I'm like you. I like the idea of it. Like, and when I open it, I'm kind of like, oh, cool. I actually do kind of like it. My problem is I don't ever really click that button. I almost forget it's there. Yeah. It hasn't really worked its way into my routine. Whereas we did post on the site a concept that someone made where the start menu incorporated those widgets. To me, that made more sense. And then you can make the start menu even bigger, right? I like that idea where you hit start, you can have your weather, you can maybe have a news widget. And it's now we're blurring the lines again between a live tile and a widget anyway, but that was always blurred technically.
Yeah.
But I feel like they should take that panel, its features, and put them to the start menu, or allow people to opt in to do that. Because I think I would. I think I may use it more. I don't know why I don't click it as much. Because, like I said, when I do open it, I'm like, neat. And I actually do scroll through and I read the stories.
I think it's because it needs a purpose. Like the start menu has a purpose. You go there to launch apps. And if it, in addition to that function being a thing, had the widgets, then yeah, sure, I would use the widgets because they're there now. Whereas because it's dedicated to a widgets panel, I have no need for widgets in my head, so I'm not going to click that button. You know, like I would use them if it's in something else that I do need to use. But if it's in its own area which I don't need to use, I'm not going to use them. Which I think is where, for me at least, widgets falls into.
And plus, you know, we got that cool Windows 10 weather in the taskbar,
yeah, which of course, it away.
To be fair, some people really hated too.
Sure.
But to me, it was a little bit more useful because I was a little bit more glance and go. I could just look at my taskbar, see it's 89 and sunny out, right?
Yeah.
And that also reminds me that's the weather, and I click it and boom, I get like the full weather forecast, right? With the taskbar, even the icon is sort of like nondescript. Like, you know, like what is that? You know. It doesn't make me want to, like, if it was a news icon, that might be better. Then I'd be like, oh, that news. Let me click and open the news. And maybe I think that's what you're talking about, where it doesn't have a purpose. Whereas I think if the icon was like a news icon, whatever that is, right? That's kind of hard to make. You put a little newspaper or something. Or if it was a weather icon or something like that, it does feel more purposeful. Like, oh, let me click the news and see what it is and open up and you get the headlines. And they've kind of experimented with that. You can still actually download like the news beta scrolling thingy, right? Which I don't think is a really great answer. But I think you're right. If they gave it more purpose and made it was a news feature, here's your headlines for today. And it also had weather because that MSN News does like that too anyway. I feel like I'd probably actually even use it more. But right now when I just see that icon, I'm like, I don't know what that is. My brain doesn't want to register. And I don't know, maybe bring back a weather thing.
Yeah. I mean, there's a big empty space on the far left of the taskbar now, which would be great for like a weather ticker. But who knows? Maybe that would be in version 2.
That's a great idea.
I think it is. Yeah, I think it's a really great idea. You know, I've also seen a lot of people who just are totally against the idea of having news anywhere in Windows, which sure. I can see. I totally actually see the point in that, because a lot of people the whole fake news movement, the idea of that. There's a lot of people who just don't like news and seeing news, and you can curate the news feed in this, like the Microsoft Start service.
Curation.
Yeah, they can do. You can curate. You can tell it which topics you like and don't like, but I think that's just a lot of people just don't even want to deal with it. They just want.
So here's how you solve this. So you make the widgets sort of like the out-of-box experience when you install Windows 11 for the first time. It's like, what are you going to use this PC for? Gaming, school, friends and family. And then the idea is it kind of pre-configures and pre-installs apps based on that. So if you pick business, I think it installs like Skype Business and keeps Teams highlighted, right? They should have a widget configurator. What do you want to use this widget for? Do you want gaming stuff. You want the latest on gaming, and it gives you gaming news. It gives you the latest games out there, reviews, highlights of the Xbox Game Pass in the store. Or maybe you want news, right? Like, yeah, give me the major headlines of the
Yeah.
day. I want weather and email, right? I just want it there. Like they can then customize that based on the stuff you want, and just a little quick few menus walkthrough. That would be interesting if
Yeah.
they could do.
And right now it doesn't. So what it does when you open that widgets panel for the first time, it just gives you the default selection of topics, which usually includes a lot of crap headlines about, celebrities and scandalous news stories and stuff, which a lot of people look at and go, no, thank you, and never look at it again. It gives a very poor first impression. And, I think what you just suggested would really sort of help fix that issue. So when you click on the widgets panel for the first time, they're just taking you to the thing and go, there you are. It says, hey, welcome to widgets. We can tailor this exactly to your liking. And then you can choose for the topics and then press OK. And then instead of seeing, celebrity in bikini, it's this latest game is coming out on October 7th. And the people are more interested in that then at that point.
Yeah. So there you go, Microsoft. There's our advice. We agree that widgets as is not really great right now, but it has a ton of potential. And they just got to really kind of flesh it out a bit. I think it could work. The idea is neat.
Yeah.
But...
So the one area of Windows 11 which I think Microsoft has done a really, really good job is with the Snap Assist sort of functionality and task view and sort of the productivity aspect of Windows. I think they've done a really good job here. And these features alone, I think, are worth upgrading to Windows 11 on their own. Snap Assist, for example, has been improved dramatically. The animations involved in actually snapping things and resizing things now is amazing. It's super fluid, keeps you in your flow, and it really does. There's also a new Snap Assist menu. So when you hover over the maximize button on a window, you get like a little drop down, which gives you a bunch of different snapping grids that you can choose from. So no longer do you have to have like foreknowledge of that. And you don't have to like drag your window to the very edge of your screen, especially if you're on an ultra wide. That's a nightmare. So you don't have to do that no more. There's a little menu that allows you to do it through that, which is great. Task view has been updated. Virtual desktops specifically are way more customizable now. You can actually name the virtual desktops and reorganize them and set different backgrounds for each. And then they'll even persist across reboots, which is super fun. Docking and undocking. So if you use a laptop and you dock to a larger display, that whole thing has been redone and it's now much more reliable. Windows will actually remember where programs were on each display. So when you undock, those programs are sort of minimized to your one display, of course, and you can open them up again. But then when you dock back, Windows remembered where all those programs were, so they will move back to where they were, which Windows has never been able to do before, which I think is insane, but it does with Windows 11 now. For tablets, if you use tablet in portrait mode, for example, snapping is much smarter. So in Windows 10, you snap side by side in portrait, and it would snap them side by side, which is ridiculous because the app would just be like a really long column at that point. Windows 11, it's smart enough to know that it should snap top and bottom, so you still get plenty of room within the app, which is great. So lots of improvements in that regard, in regards to being productivity and working within Windows. And like I said, like these features alone, I think are worth upgrading to Windows 11 for, because they really do make Windows feel easier to use. The snapping stuff especially, it's fantastic in Windows 11.
Yeah, and you touched on external displays / multiple display support. As someone's using that literally right now, it's way better. It's so good now. First of all, it has subtle animation.
Yeah.
When I'm plugging in like a second display, it does this thing where this display like shrinks in for a second.
Yep.
And then it comes back, and then the other one turns on. And that visual indicator tells me it's working.
Yes.
And that's because sometimes you plug in something like an eGPU, it's not instant. It takes a few seconds for the drivers to kick in and the computer to recognize what's going on. But you don't know that. Before, it was just like, you might hear a doot-doot sound, and then you wait, and you're like, all right, is it working? Now it does this cool animation, and then I'm like, oh, it's about to do it, and boom, it kicks on. And it's been very consistent and reliable. And this idea that if you're using multiple displays, it remembers where your apps are when you unplug is also like, that's huge. Like that really just makes it like that much better. And it's, now I'm trying to experiment using Surface Laptop Studio as like my main and only device kind of thing. I'm really appreciative of that. And yeah, you're right. The Snap Assist stuff is, people really love the Snap Assist. And again, it comes back to multiple displays, or if you're using an ultra wide display, being able to do that and snap in those various configurations is just crucial. Having on an ultra wide 3 apps opened, but customized almost is just that's the dream of working, man.
Yeah,
I love it.
it's so funny. Whenever I go to Mac OS, I'm always gobsmacked at how poor window management is because they don't have features like snapping. And then an Apple fan will be like, "Oh, you can buy an app in the App Store that gives you that function." And I'm like, "Wait, buy an app? What year is it? I'm not buying an app that gives me basic OS functionality. It should be built in." But yeah, no, Windows 11 kills it in that regard. It is the best version of Snap Assist that they've ever done, for sure.
Definitely.
So yeah, I think that's basically the sort of highlights for my review. It's mostly positive, but there are some negatives in there, which is to be expected. Nothing is perfect. There is room for improvement. Luckily for the things like widgets and Teams chat, you can just turn them off from the taskbar, and they won't bother you again, which is nice. But the functionality aspect, where there's lack of functionality, it will be a problem for, I think, quite a few power users especially. But my advice to those people is just hang on to Windows 10 for another year if you really can't stomach it. And in a year's time, we'll see where we are, because I do think Microsoft will address a lot of those functionality issues, especially around the taskbar.
Yeah, and that's always the takeaway with this stuff, right? Which is, if you're a hardcore power user, it's like you're going to probably have more problems with this. Whereas if you're a casual user or a normal person, I would call, who uses this for work, you'll probably be a lot more fine with it. Like, there's a lot of stuff people criticize about this. I'm like, I have never used that feature in my life. You know, and that's not to disparage it. Like, if it bothers you, it bothers you. I'm not saying you're wrong, but there is that greater context about, who this is for and general audience kind of stuff. We'll see what happens. The good news is with Windows 11, it doesn't break anything with compatibility. So this idea of like, I know people are like, but fragmentation, like, okay, stop saying that. I think Android has proven fragmentation doesn't matter. Like, I remember for years in the early 2010s there, people were talking about Android 2014, 2015. Oh my God, fragmentation is going to kill it. It's like, it didn't. And there's no app store here, so there's no, technically there is a dev store, right? There are modern elements, but you can bring those to Windows 10 too.
Yeah. There's nothing exclusive to Windows 11 in regards to app development, because a developer can build an app for Windows 11 and it should run on Windows 10 just fine. Like, there is no new app platform. UWP was we've made this comparison before, but when the move from Windows 7 to Windows 8 happened, there was this modern, Metro UI app platform. And then when the move from Windows 8 to Windows 10 happened, there was this UWP app platform, which was not backported to the previous versions of Windows. That hasn't happened with Windows 11. The app platform, the app story has remained the same. It's Win32, UWP, PWA. I guess technically Android apps is an additional one now. But to be fair, I wouldn't even be surprised if that comes to Windows 10 as well, because it is technically just like a VM thing running in the background. So who knows in that regard. But I don't think Android app development is an actual app story for Windows. I think that's just an additional thing that they're adding to Windows for tablet users, because I don't think most desktop users are going to take much advantage of the Android app support.
Speaking of, we should mention the store. I did do an interview with the head of the store, the program manager of who's now, the name escapes me. Hold on, got to bring up my own article here. Sorry, I've had a lot of details I had to memorize here. Oh yeah, Giorgio Sardo, really nice guy too, and he's Italian, really good accent. So I go read that interview. It's called you're in the way, Zach. Here's the story behind Microsoft's store for Windows 11 and how its creator thinks this time it will work. So this was a deep dive I did on the new store. And I thought it was a really interesting read just because, Sardo wasn't in charge of the store. He was like an engineer working on something else. But he told me, he's like, he had a vision and a dream of how the store should be, which is pretty funny, right? But that already starts at the right point where he's already thinking about, he's passionate about this, right? He was so passionate about it, he wrote a white paper, like, this is how I think the store should look. This is how I think it should function. This should be its priorities. And he started circulating that paper internally at Microsoft. And basically, a lot of the people on the other Windows teams were like, yeah, that's a good idea. And it basically kind of had a swelling movement within the Windows team, and I don't know who his boss is. Let's just say it's Panos. I don't know. Someone went like, you know what? Fine, you're now in charge of the store. Go for it. We like this idea. And it was also like when he's like, it can't be any worse, right? So, but he then had to go and build a team behind that. So he said it took him about 6 months. Mind you, this is all during the pandemic and all this kind of stuff that's going on too, right? So for 6 months, he went and hired people around the world. There's people from China, there's people from India, there's people in the US, people in Europe, people from Africa, like just everywhere was represented. And they weren't all strictly classic developers who work on stores before. They were from people with different backgrounds. One of those, of course, was Rudy Nguyen. A lot of people know him from the Windows Phone days. He did SixTag and all the Instagram app. And, his mission was to do major apps that those companies weren't doing for Windows Phone. And he became kind of a legend. And he had already been working at Microsoft for a little while after leaving Drop. But he became, I guess, the senior architect of the store. And a bunch of other UWP developers were brought on. Christopher Blackman, who does MyTube, and there were a few others, I believe, as well, were all brought in. And if you were to ask me the all-star team of who should be making the store, this guy kind of nailed it, in my opinion. And he knew that was important. And you and I have had this conversation. The reason I hired Zach years ago, because Zach was way better at doing Windows stuff than I was and what we were doing at the time. His videos were better, his connections were better. So I could I could try to do that myself and try to compete, or I could just hire him. That's how leadership should work. It's like you just recognize the good people out there and you bring them in. And then from there, they went and set goals for the store. And his main goal was forget about revenue. This idea of the revenue model and all this driving the store, that's the least important thing. Our goal is to make consumers happy and to make developers happy and to bring those two groups together. And so he went through, and that's how they designed the store. And they did it very quickly. It's still very much a work in progress. In fact, as I was interviewing him, he's like, a new feature just rolled out. So now if you go to the store and you type in, say, WhatsApp, before it would just give you a list of apps. Now it shows they figured out intent. So it brings WhatsApp as the main app front and center, and then below it are sort of the other search results, which is exactly how it works on Android. But they're fixing search, right? Search he says it's very hard. But they're getting there, and it's already been improved. He says we have a lot more left to do. There's a lot more stuff we want to do for this build, but as you mentioned, they ran out of time, right? So they wanted to get it out now, but there's a lot more features coming. We don't know when the Android stuff is coming. Someone's asking about that. It's coming soon. It's going to hit the insider channels, I believe, probably in the next couple of weeks, couple of months. So it'll be there. I don't think we'll see it roll out until probably fall 2022.
Yeah, that's a good question. We tried to ask Microsoft that they wouldn't comment. But there's two options they could go with. They ship it as a cumulative update to the existing shipping build of Windows 11, or they save it for the next major version of Windows 11,
right,
which we believe will be version 22H2, which will come out in the second half of 2022. They could go either way with it. I know that they've been testing this functionality on top of the shipping build, so they could deliver it if they really wanted to on the shipping build, but who knows at this point.
Yeah, so we'll see what happens with that. But then the Epic Game Store launched, within the store, which is kind of funny because it's just the Win32. You just download it and install. But, I asked about that, kind of about the security kind of thing. And, right now, if you install the Epic Game Store, or even, Opera should be in the store now. I'm not sure if it is, but it's coming. These use their own app updaters. And for some stuff, it makes sense. I think with a browsers tend to update more frequently and have their own updaters built in. So I think it makes sense that they don't update through the store. But they have stuff like, WinZip and other more classic apps that do this. And so a developer can easily solve this. They can just wrap it in the MSIX installer packaging system. So this is a programming tool developers can use to wrap their app in, and that installs then through the store, and it lights up all the store stuff, including auto updating and stuff like that. So their goal was basically to really have no barriers to entry for developers. Yeah, get them into the store. No, you don't have to do any tricks. Then from there, if they want these more advanced features, they can start using MSIX. And he says they've seen a lot of momentum around it, and he expects to see a few big developers actually start to switch over to it. So any of these apps, like Discord, it's a good example. Discord doesn't update through the store; it updates manually, or through the app itself. But Discord people could just take that, put it through this, and it could then do that. And we may see that happen. That's the thing to watch, is to see that conversion if it happens. But they go down that path. And then if they want to say, if Discord want to rewrite their app to be more modernized, use WinUI 3, version 3, and WinForms and all this, then they can actually rewrite the app and really go into the more modern Mika-looking design. And they can even do kind of hybrids now with Win32 and some of those design elements. So they don't even need to rewrite the whole app. So it's this whole sort of spectrum of that developers have options too. I'm really curious if we see that happen. The tools are there. It's a gradient. You can do nothing. You can do the very bare minimum with a wrapper and an installer, or you can start to rewrite parts of it with Project Reunion. That's what Reunion is. It's the idea you could take a classic app, but you can add some of these new design elements to it instead of rewriting it as like a UWP. You can still do UWP if you want, or you can do PWA if you have a website, right? So all these options are there, but how that progresses will be interesting. But we should mention Disney Plus came to the store this week. There were a few others too. I'm forgetting.
Discord.
Yeah, well, Discord had already kind of been there. Let's see. I have a list here. Here we go. We got Discord, Disney Plus, Amazon Prime Video, Netflix, iTunes, Adobe Acrobat, Corel Draw, Canva, TikTok, Pluto TV, Paramount Plus is there now, Sling TV, Reddit. There's a Wikipedia. That's a PWA, which is actually really nice. Of course, you got WinZip. And the thing with Disney Plus is really cool because that's another feature that was just announced, which is if you go search for a movie, say Cruella, and it shows up, I haven't checked it, but it should show up as you can buy it through the Microsoft Store or you can rent it. But if it's on another streaming platform, in this case Disney Plus, next to it you'll see a button that says Stream on Disney Plus. If you click that button and you don't have the app installed, it then goes and asks you to install Disney Plus. If you already have it installed and set up, when you click that button, it's going to open the app, take you to the movie, and let you just stream it. That deep linking is amazing. And that's an open, now the question is, do we see Amazon, Vudu, even Apple do that? But they can. And I think that's a huge thing because right now the issue we have with digital movies and streaming is it's all over the place. And sometimes you may be able to stream it for free if you already have the service. Sometimes you may be able to rent it. And being able to see those badges down there would be amazing. So I think that this is a really good idea. And also, I think reinforces the idea that the movies and TV thing is definitely sticking around. I know people, ever since Groove died, people are like, they're going to kill movies and TV, right? And I know people are just waiting for it. And I really don't think it's going to happen. I asked, they're like, yeah, it's a different business model altogether. It's actually very popular, both on Windows and Xbox.
I'll tell you why it won't go away. It's because Microsoft doesn't lose money on it. It's not
Right.
It's not something they lose money on. It's a storefront. They sell things. Whereas the music streaming industry is completely different. And if there's not enough subscribers, Microsoft doesn't make its money back. That's just how that works.
100%, because they have to pay a flat fee to rent that entire catalog.
Exactly.
And then you have to have enough people to pay to cover that, and they don't. But when you rent a movie, you're literally just renting that movie, one-time fee. It's much better. It was funny too, because when I get to interview people like this, I'm like, do my own personal request. I'm like, can you please just give me the option to upgrade my movies to 4K? Like Voodoo has. I'm like, I don't care if you charge me full price. Just let me spend my money irrationally just to upgrade to 4K. So I'm going to take that to the team next week. So fingers crossed. If that happens, you can thank me. I know 2 people will care about that. But and the other thing was the pop-up store. And you knew about this, but I hadn't really seen it in action. This is genius, by the way, I think. We all know when you're an app developer and you have an app, and it's very common that stores give you a little bit of a code. and it makes a badge, and then you can embed it into a web page. That's what you see when you go to websites for applications, and you're like, get it for the Microsoft Store. So they still have that, but now it's like a smart badge, and this is wild. So you create the badge, but when you click it, it doesn't just open the store on your computer. It opens up a little pop-up with the description, the name of it, and an install button. And you can just literally click install right then and there instead of going to the store and doing that whole thing, which is a much more jarring experience. I thought that was super clever. It's definitely a more engaging, it's like one click to install. We've never really seen that before on Windows, and this is your web technologies coming into play. I thought that was a cool idea. What do you think about it? You think devs are going to use that stuff?
I would assume so, yeah, because this is essentially a replacement for the, you see it these days already. If you go to, say, the slack.com/download or spotify.com/download, it will link to the store, and it has like a little badge. This pop-up store sort of replaces that. So instead of you clicking on the badge and then it taking you to the Microsoft app, it's just all handled within the pop-up that appears within the browser. So it's a much more seamless experience rather than being taken from one app into another. It just handles it all through the pop-up that appears within the browser.
Now I'm thinking about it, what actually happens is right now, before you would click like that button, it would actually open a separate web page.
Yes, and then it'd be like, and then a pop-up that says, "Would you like to open this URL in the Microsoft Store?" You choose yes or no. It's stupid.
Yeah, and you have to do that and open, and then it would open the store and get it.
Yeah,
this just goes right to the store just to install directly as a little pop-up, and it doesn't like take over your screen. I think this is really clever. This is what I'm talking about, though. This is like clever vision stuff, right? This is people who are really passionate about the store, who are both developers who made the apps, working on this stuff, and it's good. It's a really good version. Like when you open the store today, it's kind of ridiculous, all the major brands that are listed there. Now it's technically only like 20 or 30 apps deep, right? Like you start going down further, you start getting into the old junky kind of stuff. So they have a lot of work to do. But compared to this store had more, Windows 11 store has way more momentum right now than Windows 10 store did the entire run.
Yeah.
And I really like these designs. I think they're doing smart things. They're working on the back end for downloading. They're going to show the Win32 stuff into the library pretty soon. My only gripe is I don't like how if you search for Doom and you get the game, you have to click it and it opens up in the Xbox app. And the Xbox app handles the download. I asked about that. He says, well, the Xbox app is, more refined for gamers and has all these other features, which I agree it does. But I feel like it should be reversed. I feel like if you're in the app for Xbox and you hit Doom 3, I think you should open the store to download. But
yeah,
that's not going to change anytime soon. So. But yeah, go check it out. Let me guys know what you think of the store. Is Microsoft doing a good job there? What else could they fix? And use that feedback function. But so far, I'm happy. Like it even gives you all the information you want, including the architecture and what device it runs on. Just the things I think we've all been asking for. We'll see though if it catches on. Right? That's the big question. We'll see if developers actually start embracing it, start leveraging these technologies.
Yeah.
Do you want to wrap up the Windows 11 stuff?
Sure. I mean, that's, like I said, basically all the sort of big stuff I wanted to mention on the podcast. There's so much to Windows 11, and we've only really touched the big new changes. There's things like improvements to the Windows subsystem for Linux. It supports Linux GUI apps now. Windows on ARM got a huge performance boost thanks to more of it being native to ARM, plus ARM64 EC, which the Office is now compiled for, which sort of is technically a hybrid app between ARM and Intel compiled, so bits of it can now be native, whereas other parts not so much, and then improves performance in apps as well, which is great. All kinds of things, really. So yeah, like I said, it comes down to two categories. If you're okay with simplicity and sort of regression functionality around things like the taskbar, Windows 11 is a great upgrade for you, and I think you're going to enjoy it. If you're somebody who actually needs that sort of functionality, if you need to move the taskbar to the top of the display, if you need to have everything accessible within one click on the right-click menu, then Windows 11 is not going to be for you at this time. And that's basically all you need to know.
There you go. Well, I'm sure we'll have a lot more on Windows 11. All right, let's turn to hardware, starting with Surface Pro 8, which I got right behind me.
Snap.
Zach got one too. And it is, I think, don't get me wrong, between this and Surface Laptop, they're both amazing. But, this is a tried and true design. A lot of fans of it out there. Zach's not one of them. I love the Surface Pro, though. I think it's great. They surprised me a little bit of how close this was to the Surface Pro X's design. I mean, you put them side by side. It's front on. You can't tell the difference between them. They're the same size and everything. Difference is Pro 8 is a hair thicker and has the venting on it. But that's what you get with Intel. My big thing, so it's all about the little details for me that's important on this device as someone who's a fan of it, right? This is why I hope people got out of my review, because I'll tell you things like it doesn't pick up fingerprints. Like, this is such an annoying thing with devices that are black, that you just touch them. And the original Surface Pro X was like this. It just collected fingerprints like nobody's business, which is why I think Zach and I preferred platinum. But this new black, this graphite that they're using,
it's good.
It's good.
Yeah. Oh, he's disappeared.
Windows. Someone decided to mow the lawn with their industrial mower. But yeah, it's like it has a little bit of a shimmer to it. And they switched the materials, right? They went from magnesium to recyclable aluminum. Mm-hmm. But it just feels nice. They rounded the edges even more. It feels cool. Like, it just feels, it looks nice. But the fingerprint thing really, Also, another small thing, there's magnets now on the keyboard, so when you close it, it stays closed and doesn't flop around. Like, I feel like that's something we've been asking for a really long time. They did it on the Pro X. I think the Go does it too.
Go does it as well, yep.
Yeah, so now it's finally here on the Pro 8. And it's just it's those little details. But yeah, so you get 11th gen Intel, performs very well. I put the benchmarks up there. And what I mean by perform well is historically we've seen Surface Pros with the same chip as the laptop not perform as well because of thermals and other things. This one actually was near the top in our list of devices like other laptops. Like, it competes with an XPS 13 9310, right? It can actually go as fast, if not faster, for benchmarks than that. Same with the the Razer Book 13. That was a very powerful device. This is as powerful as that. The other big thing, of course, you're getting 2 Thunderbolt 4 ports, which is huge. If you want to know why they don't go with AMD, that's because of that reason. I also think AMD's would be thermally even more constrained and have issues. But if you want Thunderbolt, and I'd argue Thunderbolt, more people would want Thunderbolt 4 than would care about AMD. I know, like, people listening to this podcast, maybe chip nerds, and be like, yeah, but AMD 6 core, I get it. But, like, mass consumers don't know what you're talking about. They're like, does it feel fast and zippy? Yep. Does it run all the things I need to do? Yep. And I get Thunderbolt 4 now? Yep. Like, those are the things people care about. They upgraded the camera on the back to 10 megapixel. Yeah, okay. It matches the Surface Pro X now. The other big thing, you get the Surface Slim Pen 2, which now goes into the keyboard and gets hidden just like Pro X. This was all stuff we, of course, predicted and said that they were going to do for a long time. I'd also like to say our theory about the Surface Pro 7 Plus and why they released it was dead on.
Yep.
They released that so Enterprise would have that one for a few years and doesn't break anything, because this one does shift the ports around. So if you have the Kensington docking station, the one that it slides and locks in, yeah, this doesn't work anymore. But the battery life is very good, or good for this class. Battery life will never be amazing for this class of device. It's too thin, it's too light. Sorry. It performs actually as well as the Surface Pro 7 Plus, which may surprise people, but that device actually got a bigger battery and also had 11th gen. Difference is the Pro 8 has a larger display. Speaking of that display, a lot going on with this display. 13 inches, yet it's a higher resolution, but same 264 or 61 PPI. So Zach can breathe deeply and sigh of relief.
It is a beautiful display.
Yeah. So they made it bigger, but didn't reduce the PPI on it, which is really nice. It's also the most color accurate Pro display they've done. It's only beaten by the Laptop Studio, but it's still very good. It crossed the 80% range for DCI-P3 and a few others. 450 nits of brightness. They added Dolby Vision to it. Dolby Vision's cool. It's not like HDR 1000 or something like that, but it is a form of HDR. So a lot of movies these days are color graded for Dolby Vision. And if they are, and you rent them or download them and stream them, this will play that content. It's basically an HDR effect. The blacks will be much more black. The lights, the white scenes will be brighter. You get much better contrast. Have you played, and if you haven't, Zach, try it. If you have a Surface Pro 8, try this too. The Matrix Resurrections 4K trailer on the Surface Pro 8.
I've not.
It looks insane. I mean, it looks so freaking good. Yeah, it's a very, very good display. What else about it? It doesn't have anti-reflective. But I'm not going to rant on that. But that is something they can fix to make it better. But overall, it's and the audio. The audio, they increased the speakers from 1.6 watts to 2 watts, I believe. And then, of course, they added Dolby Atmos, which they also snuck in on the 7 Plus, too. Dolby Atmos is really nice. It gives you better spatial surround sound. I think the speakers on this, with the way the chassis works now, it has almost a resonance to it. The audio is so freaking good on this thing. And I should also mention it has an adaptive color sensor now. What that means is there's a little sensor sits at the top based on the color of the lighting in your room. So versus like fluorescent lighting versus incandescent, it'll adjust the display color, the white balance basically, to better reflect more accurate colors for what your eyes actually see. If this sounds like Apple True Tone, you're right, because that's basically what it is. But that's now on the Pro 8 as well. Zach, what was your experience with it? So, I mean, you're not really a Pro 8 or Pro user.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on it?
I think it's a beautiful bit of hardware that they've certainly, like you said, they've matched the Surface Pro X in terms of design now. It's a slightly thicker Pro X, but I think the trade-off in regards to performance is worth it for most people. You know, like a year ago, the argument was, oh, you get the Pro X because it's ARM. Well, that wasn't the argument. The argument was you get the Pro X because of the new design. The ARM processor was what enabled that design, but at the cost of performance. Now that argument isn't really there anymore. The argument is you either get the Pro 8 with the same design as the Pro X. Oh, it's also more powerful and has a better display and everything else. Right now, the Pro 8 is a much better product than the Pro X in a number of ways, outside of thinness and I guess maybe battery life.
Yeah, battery life is pretty close. It's closer than I think Qualcomm would want.
But things like the 120 hertz display, like that 120 hertz display makes a big difference. Like once you go from 60 to 120, I think it's a noticeable improvement in response time. Like using the pen on this device feels amazing. It feels instant. It's like an Apple Pencil on an iPad now. It is really great. The keyboard, I do like the keyboard. I'm not a fan of the Pro line because I'm not a fan of the form factor as a whole, not because it's a Surface Pro. It's just the 2-in-1 with the kickstand and and the floppy keyboard is what I'm not a huge fan of. When I'm sitting on my lap, it's not great. But this is on a desk. I think this version is fantastic. The screen is massive. The keyboard doesn't feel bouncy. I think they've reinforced it with. Can't remember the material now. I'm sure I read somewhere that they've reinforced this version so it doesn't bounce as much anymore, which is a big improvement. Of course, that doesn't really solve the issue of it being on your lap and being top heavy and whatnot. But on a desk, I think it's fantastic. Oh, Thunderbolt 4 is great as well, so that sort of gives you, that sort of half future-proofs you in regards to the GPU side of things. So you can now plug in an eGPU and actually take advantage of a dedicated GPU if you need to do that. So you can play games on this thing if you wanted to, and unless the game is very CPU intensive, you should be just fine. But yeah, I like it. I like how it looks. I like how it feels. I like the portability. I am surprised by how heavy it is. It is a heavy tablet.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, it is technically heavier than the Pro 7 and Pro 7 Plus.
And it's also heavier than like an iPad.
but no, that's true, and that's where the Pro X comes to be. But
sure, yeah.
When I put the Pro 7 Plus with the pen attached to it, and I weigh them and hold them in my hand, I can't tell the difference.
No, I'm sure it's similar to other Surface Pros. I just think maybe the Surface Pro line is heavier than I was expecting it to be, really, in regards to other. Because I probably look at it wrong, because I still look at the Surface Pro as a tablet with a keyboard. But most people, including Microsoft, don't look at it like that. They look at it as a laptop with a detachable keyboard accessory, I think, which whatever. But I still look at it as a tablet primarily, and yeah, comparing it to say like an iPad, it's certainly heavy. Like I would get tired holding this up in bed at night watching or reading something. So keep that in mind if you're looking at the Surface Pro as an iPad or as a tablet. But although to be fair, at that point, get a Surface Go. The Surface Go is so light; it's so great. We'll talk about the Surface Go later.
Yeah, no, the Surface Go is definitely a much better tablet-like device.
Yeah.
For those, but yeah, I don't find it's funny because people made a big deal about the Pro 8 being thicker and heavier and even slightly taller, but it's really when I'm holding next to the Surface Pro 7, I couldn't tell. I couldn't humanly tell you one was heavier than the other. So it wasn't that big of a deal. But yeah, but it's still like a 2.5-pound device. Yeah, the 120 hertz display is really nice. It ships by default at 60 because it does impact battery life. So your opinions of that. Now, there's no dynamic refresh yet. Microsoft's been kind of coy on that.
Yeah, we tried to ask them, and they responded as if they didn't know what it was.
Yeah, and I think the reason for that, because Windows 11 supports a dynamic refresh, but it'll jump between 60 and 120 hertz based on what you're doing. So if you're inking or scrolling, it'll be 120, but then it bumps back down. So it gives you the best of both worlds. You don't need to manually switch. I'm like, it's coming to the Surface Pro and Laptop Studio. They just don't like to publicly guarantee something's going to happen until it actually does, right? So they're waiting on, I think, some drivers that need to be updated. But I do expect that to be available, and maybe even the Wake on Approach feature as well. We'll have to wait and see what happens there. But I'm pretty positive that dynamic stuff will be happening, and it'll solve this issue. But and
the reason it ships with 60 by default and not 120 is to save battery life. Like I've been using mine exclusively on 120, and the battery life isn't as strong as you might expect it to be. I think what Microsoft claims, was it 19 hours on 60 hertz, and it's not getting that on 60 hertz. So if you enable it on 120, you're getting way less than that. I would, in my sort of actual usage of it, because I have been using it, maybe 6 hours, which isn't terrible. Don't get me wrong. But it's not like a full-on laptop, like the laptop studios we'll get to, which is 120 by default. That lasts all day for me. Like it is, the battery on that is a champ. But that's obvious, right? Look at the form factor differences. The Pro 8 is limited by its design. Everything has to be behind the display. You can't have any battery in the keyboard. Well, technically you could. I don't know why they don't reintroduce that keyboard cover. Anyway, yeah, all the batteries in behind the screen, so there isn't much room for battery, which is why the battery life on the Surface Pro line is never going to be amazing. The Pro X could fix that with more efficient ARM chips, but that's a story for another day. But yes, the battery life at 120 is average.
I have numbers. So I ran the PC Mark 10 battery, which is it's called Modern Office. So this is light to medium workloads. It cycles through web browsing, video calls, and basically using Microsoft Office. So at 60 hertz, you get about 10 hours and 45 minutes. And on 120 hertz, you get about 9 hours. So it's an hour and 45 minutes difference, maybe, pushing towards 2 hours. Now, battery benchmarks are hard because there's a lot going on these days with computers. For instance, they ship with the ambient light sensor enabled. That auto adjusts your brightness. That's to save battery, but also make it look better, right? Well, I disabled that. So it's not saving battery there. So I kept the brightness at 40%, which is around 100 nits. Some people will consider that too dim. And that's going to be one of the biggest factors that really impacts your battery here is how bright do you keep that screen? Because if you're running at like 90% brightness at 120 hertz, your numbers are going to be like way different than mine. You can be like, why is Dan lying about that? But I ran it at 40%, recommended power usage, ambient light sensor turn off, adaptive color turned off. I also disabled the adaptive contrast, which you can now disable, by the way. That's an Intel thing, and people used to hate it. It's the thing that would cause the screen to kind of go too dark sometimes. Yeah. That's a battery saving feature. So I turned off all that stuff, and that's why I was able to get, 10 hours and 45 minutes doing light to medium productivity. So we're not really pushing the GPU part here. Uh, but Zach's right. If you put on 120 hertz and you're doing gaming, or you keep that screen brightness up at 60, 70, 90%,
Yeah.
6 hours is definitely.
I'll just, as you mentioned that, I just went to check to see what my brightness on, because I have the auto brightness thing set, so it just decides for me what brightness it should be at. And right now in this room, you can, if you're watching the video, you can sort of see how bright it is, which is, I think, relatively normal lighting conditions for most of the day. My brightness level is at 90 right now, and I'm on 120 hertz. So my battery, it makes sense why I'm seeing worse battery life, but that's not something I've ever thought about, because I just leave auto brightness and all of that just as their default. So if the Surface Pro is, deciding that it needs to be at 90% and then killing all of its battery life, then I guess that's how it does it. But yeah, that's totally a great point. You should, if you want to save battery life, do not have auto brightness on, because that will kill it.
Display brightness is the number one thing, because processors are smart.
Yeah.
And that's the whole Intel step technology and all this kind of stuff. And now that they're getting into with 12th gen Alder Lake with the cores, processors only turn on when they're needed. They burst quickly to 3 gigahertz, and then they quickly drop back down again. And that whole ability to do that's been what Intel's been refining for all these years. So CPUs, unless you're hammering them 100% of the time, which again is not a normal workload either, they're smart. Displays, though, you put it at 90% and you leave it at 90%, it's basically you're powering a giant light panel.
Yeah.
Like that draws and that's why there's been a lot of effort for 1 watt displays and all this kind of stuff to try to make that better. But you throw in things like auto brightness, auto contrast, those technologies help reduce battery and also keeping the screen appropriately lit. But yeah, that's why I hate reporting battery life, and I try to be as transparent as I can when I do these tests. But my results will be different from everybody else's.
Yeah.
But
so I think overall, I think this Surface Pro is the best Surface Pro yet. Like there are no regressions really in any of the choices they've made. That there's no downside to the improvements. Like every generation will have, they've changed this up, but this doesn't do this anymore. Like there's nothing really here that you could complain of. Maybe if you're an enterprise, you'll be annoyed that your accessories don't work anymore. But other than that, I think this is the ultimate perfected Surface Pro. There's nowhere else for this line to go now.
I said that. That's how I ended my review. I'm like, Microsoft, you can coast now.
Yeah, this is it. Until everything can fold, this is it for the Pro.
Like they just need to upgrade the CPUs on a regular basis and give Dan his anti-reflective layer to cut the glare out. But other than that, we should also mention you can get up to 32 gigs of RAM now, so that's a first. They got rid of the 4 gig model. It's only 8 gigs. They also got rid of the Core i3 model. It is available in the commercial version if you want it, though, or will be. Instead, they're kind of pushing people to the Surface Pro X, which does actually, when I think about it, make a pretty good Core i3 alternative. Because that now you can get a Wi-Fi only version for $899. You can also manually upgrade the SSD on this, just like Surface Pro 7 Plus and Pro X. And yes, I am working on a guide on how to do that.
Because are you like all one things, for the laptop studio? Because I don't even know how you would begin to upgrade that one.
You can do the laptop studio, but you got to peel off the rubber feed.
Yeah, no thanks.
It's fine. Pro 8, it's like literally a door that opens up, and the swapping is simple. That will take you no less than a minute. Actually, it's a little bit, because you got to reuse the enclosure, and you can put thermal paste on it. The trick is, one, how do you get Windows 11 onto the new drive? That's a little bit tricky. There's a couple ways to do it. 2, what drive do you buy? Because there's a lot of answers to this one. You can buy the official one through Microsoft if you can find it, and you'll probably pay a lot for it. But you might as well, if you're going to upgrade your storage, go for a faster one. And that has to do with the BG4 Toshibas and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of details about which ones you should buy and the pricing. And now there's a new issue I was telling Zach about regarding where these are coming from. So look for that in a guide. I'll explain it all, which ones you should buy and all that kind of stuff, how you can save some money and how it works. But yeah, huge fan of this device. Little sad there's no LTE version right now. Comes out around December. We'll see if Microsoft sends me one to review with LTE. Sadly, no 5G version. I'm a little bummed about that. I don't think it's the end of the
That'll
world.
be next year.
I think it will be next year, but I think it'll be Pro X first.
Oh yeah, 100% the Pro X. Well, actually, I guess it might be the same time. I don't think we'll see a new Pro X until next fall. I could be wrong about that, but yeah,
we'll see. So there you go, Surface Pro 8. Very happy with it. One of my favorite devices right now. Except there is, of course, the big guy in the room, the Surface Laptop Studio. Let me circle back to where I was talking about earlier in the podcast. Hey, we're still going strong. No crashing, no issues so far.
Yeah. Well, here's the comparison to that is, I don't know if you remember, but I tried to run this podcast on the Surface Book 3 back at the end of 2020 when I was trying to just go to one device and just sort of dock in at a desk and stuff. Failed miserably. The Surface Book 3 could not handle this podcast, which... streaming 720p 30 frames a second, it's not that taxing, but the Surface Book 3 CPU just could not handle it. Laptop Studio, perfectly well. It's doing perfectly. No issues, no hiccups, no drop frames, no nothing. It's just doing it as you would expect it to. So that's my benchmark. It passed it.
Yeah. And mine is even more insane. So I have mine on a stand right now. Someone tweeted me a photo, I think his name was Scott Avery, about his setup. I didn't realize until after the review that you can flip the Laptop Studio's display backwards.
Did you not realize?
Which makes sense because it lays flat like that. So why not just fold it, push it back up like that? So it does like the Surface Book where you can reverse the display, but you can keep it like that on your desk. So it looks, I'm using right now as my secondary display, and it looks just like I have like a giant 14-inch tablet in front of me. It looks freaking awesome. I'll send out a picture eventually. I'm doing a guide on this, by the way. So what makes my setup crazy is I have one of the Thunderbolt ports goes to a Razer Core X. That's an external GPU, which then has an RTX 3080 in it. I've also put in a 2080 Ti and a 1080, but right now I'm running the 3080 in it because why not? So my setup right now is being powered by NVIDIA RTX 3080, which is awesome, and it's been running fine. The problem with the eGPUs, and I realized this morning as Zach experienced because he had to hear it all. I had the older Razer Core, which was a smaller one, so I took that one home from my office because I was like, oh, it's smaller. Why wouldn't I use a smaller one? Because this new Core X is huge. I mean, it's massive. It's the size of a computer. It is so. It's like this wide, if you can see my hands. I mean, it is just, it's massive. So I was like, I'll take the smaller one. Smaller one couldn't take the 3080. The smaller one also had 4 Type A ports on the back. It's like, well, that's better. And it had Ethernet too. I'm like, well, that's cool. It's like a hub. I'll put everything in there. Came home, set it up with the 2080 Ti, plugged stuff in. It worked, but it was annoying. There's not enough power for all my RGB equipment. So my mouse would keep kind of stuttering every once in a while, and Windows kept doing the hardware detect noise every 10 seconds, which was super annoying. And it turns out that's an issue with the GPUs, that there's just not enough bandwidth sometimes to run everything through it as well as the display, because as good as Thunderbolt 3 and 4 is, it is still, we are hitting those limits. So I luckily have the new Kensington dock. It's the 4K Thunderbolt dock that they released. I'll be reviewing that as well. I plugged that into the second Thunderbolt port. Now I use that one to plug in all my peripherals because I have a lot of peripherals. I have the Brio 4K. I have the HyperX microphone I'm using. I have my hardwired keyboard, Razer keyboard with RGB. I have my Razer Basilisk mouse, which is also RGB. So that's all going through that. And so this whole, and by the way, the display is outputted to the Razer 27 display, and it's running both displays right now. It works. It works. I had a few little hiccups, but it's pretty awesome, and it's running all this stuff at one time. Is this better than an all-in-one? Hell no. I was just using the HP Envy all-in-one, and that was so much easier. Is it cool? Yeah, actually, this is a really wild setup. I'm actually kind of really enjoying it. And the ability just to now I have 2 plugs. So it's not the one plug dream. I have to have 2 plugs. But I unplug both plugs, and now I take my laptop with me. But while I'm using it like this, it's pretty wild. So the fact that it's holding up during the podcast, I guess, is a vote of confidence in it. Laptop Studio, let's go through it. Zach got one too. I have one. The review is huge. Up to 32 gigs of RAM, Core i7 H series 35-watt processor, RTX 3050 Ti graphics, unless you get the A2000 RTX, which is meant for commercial markets. So I'll talk about that in a second. I forgot the resolution on the display. Zach, do you know the resolution off the top of your head?
Not off the top of my head. I'll literally get it right now.
Well, it's a 14.4 inch display, 3x aspect ratio.
2400 by 1600.
There you go. So not as high as Surface Book. I don't care.
I care a lot, Dan.
Resolutions like battery life, I'll always take more. It's like processor. No one ever said it was too fast. No one ever said the resolution was too high. But it's a good resolution. I really like it. It's also the most color accurate display Microsoft has ever made. It's very nice. I think 83% DCI-P3, 100% sRGB. Also Dolby Vision. It's supposed to hit 500 nits of brightness. Mine hit just over 500 nits, so you get a little bit of a brighter display. No adaptive color center on this, which I was like, that's weird. Microsoft explained that on a device like this, they think that people are going to want to use the color calibrated display all the time or do it themselves kind of thing, which maybe it's true. Whereas the Pro 8, they consider it to be a more mobile device, and so they want it to be more of adaptive to your environment. I guess, maybe. We'll see. If they add an adaptive color monitor to this next time, we know that was a lie. It's got a weird venting system. It's kind of below, comes on the sides. I love it. I think the design looks absolutely amazing. The beauty of this design that you have to appreciate is when you use this on your lap, if you use it while you're wearing a blanket or something like that, you're not going to block the vents. It's going to cool completely. Whereas every other laptop, they put the vents on the bottom and you can block those. Speakers, 2 come through the keyboard, 2 come through the sides. Those are the subs. Really interesting audio. I think it could stand to gain a little bit more richness and bass to it, but they're very good. Zach pointed out that when you shift the positions of the display, because the display has, of course, as I pull it forward, it actually shifts the sound profile. It actually changes how the sound is to adapt to the positioning you're in. And of course, that's the magic of this device, right? When it's opened up, it looks like a MacBook Pro. And then you bring that screen forward and clip it. Now it's in, what do they call it? There's studio mode. Oh, you always forget the other mode.
So it's laptop mode, stage mode, studio mode.
Stage. Yeah, so stage mode. So it's good for watching movies if you're on a video call.
And you know what I will say? I have used stage mode more than I ever detached the Surface Book ever. in my 5 days, 6 days with the laptop studio. And I'll tell you why. It's because getting it into this position is easier. The whole book, you have to press and hold the detach button, then you have to wait a couple of seconds, and then it lets go. Then you can lift it out, and if you need to use the GPU, you've got to turn it around, dock it back in, lay it down. Does not a thing on the laptop. You just put it forward. It's like one motion. It's 1 second, and you're in that mode. And then you can lay it further if you need to lay it down to draw in it or whatever you need to lay it down for.
Yep, it's a little weird. It takes a little while to get used to.
Yeah,
I thought it was at the top.
Yeah. A few comments said it looks a bit awkward doing the whole pulling it into stage mode and back to laptop mode. And yes, you do get used to it, but at first it does feel a bit odd. The magnets are very strong, so it almost feels like you've got to break the display in getting it off its own magnets for the first time you do it. Once you sort of get a feel for how the magnets are and stuff, it becomes much easier. But yeah, for sure, the first few times you do it, it will be a bit awkward. Try not to do it if you do buy one. Try not to do it at certain angles. Like if you open the lid all the way before you start initiating stage mode, because otherwise you will smash the bottom of the display into the keyboard deck.
Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of it's not a perfect design in that sense, but it's cool once you kind of get used to it. Someone asked, by the way, about the Pro 8 and the eGPU. Yeah, in my review, I actually talk about that. There's a photo of it connected up to the eGPU. I talk about gaming on it and its capabilities. It's no different than the laptop studio. Outside the processor is not strong. You can absolutely game over 100. Well, it depends on the GPU you put in there. But if you're getting a 2080 Ti, you can easily game over 100 frames per second in a lot of games. But it's an expensive solution. eGPUs are cool, but I think a lot of you are going to be like, can you? Oh, that's neat. And you'll never buy one. But we'll see. They'll, what other stuff with the Laptop Studio? Amazing keyboard on it. Zach
It's
really
beautiful. It's the best keyboard surface I've ever done. It's tactile, it's clicky, it's spacious. It's just perfect, really. There are no complaints with the keyboard from me.
Also, getting back to the speakers for a second, just take a moment and appreciate there are no speaker grills on this device. I don't think that gets enough. Like all these things that they did on here with the venting grills on the side, so it doesn't ever get blocked. They're kind of out of the way. The speakers aren't visible. Like they do so much of this stuff that no one else does, and it's really hard. And just it's what makes the Surface so minimalist and clean. My favorite is the trackpad. So I'll be doing a deeper dive on the trackpad next week, hopefully. If you heard me mention Sensel on this podcast before, I interviewed them back in February. Well, their technology is being used in this. That is the haptics that's driving it. So this is a haptic trackpad. It's huge. It's the biggest trackpad Microsoft has ever made. Microsoft technically designed it, and then Sensel provided the technology behind it. But it's an awesome trackpad. It feels very much like a MacBook Pro's trackpad at this point. And as what I said about haptics before, there's a slider. You can actually turn the haptics off. It won't even vibrate. You'll still get the pressing and all that kind of stuff, but it won't make any noise / the kickback. Or you can turn up to 100%, and it really gives you a kind of a thud when you click it. But it's a very smooth and accurate trackpad. And it doesn't move. It really feels like it does, but it's kind of amazing. You'll be hearing a lot more of Sensel and their trackpads and other manufacturers as we continue to push into haptics. But see what else is there. The camera is also very good, 2 megapixel. Not as good as the Pro 8's camera, of course, but it's still a very good camera. And there was something I was going to mention. Oh, of course, the pen, the Slim Pen 2, which isn't included, but sticks to that bottom ridge, which is part of that cool design that they did. And the magnets are super strong on this.
This isn't coming away in your bag. Like a lot of people said, "Oh, this is going to fall off." It is not. There is no way this is falling off in your bag.
Yep. And that's kind of the beauty here. When this thing closes, it feels more solid than Surface Book, and you always have that pen with you. It's a great design. I think it's a unique design. It stands out. I'm pretty sure Ralph, Grain, who developed, designs a lot of this stuff, was all over this. It reminds me a little bit even of the Xbox One S, which also had that similar stepped design, and had like interesting grilling on that as well. But this is very much like Dieter Rahm's type design with brutalist.
Yeah,
it's stark.
Go on, finish what you're saying.
I was just gonna say it's very stark, clean edges. When you look at it from the top and the bottom, it's bizarre. Like it's just like there's no printing on it whatsoever.
Yeah.
Like, and from the top, it looks like a Surface Pro 8. From the bottom, it looks like nothing I've ever seen before. And opened, it looks like a MacBook Pro.
Yeah.
And then it functions like a Surface Studio and a Surface Book. Like
it's a 7-in-1.
Yeah, seriously.
I do admire. I do like how the Surface team embrace like unconventional beauty when it comes to their products. Like, you look at the Laptop Studio, I did the photos, and I totally agree with people when they say this. It looks weird. Some might even say it looks ugly, but in person, it's astonishing how nice it looks. And I can guarantee you, excuse me, getting emotional. No, I guarantee you when like if you are with a bunch of people, if you go to like a trade show or something like me and Dan have done, and you sit down at a desk full of MacBook Airs and MacBook Pros, and you pull out a Laptop Studio, your laptop is going to be the star of the table, because it's the same thing the Book did, but in a different way. The Book had a unique design because of its hinge, and when it closed, it had the gap and stuff. And at first, people criticized that gap and were like, "That's terrible design. It's gonna be a disaster." But then after X amount of months, people got over it, and lots of people, in fact, grew to like that design of the Surface Book, to the point now where we are with the Surface Laptop Studio. There are people in comment sections going, "Oh, I preferred the design of the Surface Book." Now, the same will happen with the Laptop Studio. The Laptop Studio's stage design is weird looking, I totally admit, But I bet you in a few months' time, people will forget about it, and then by the end of this design's life cycle, when Microsoft moves on to a new design, there will be people in the comments going, "Oh, I much preferred the staged design of the laptop studio. I think that looked really cool and futuristic and different." And that's just always the way it goes. And Microsoft is very good at doing this thing where they adopt unconventional beauty in its product design. You know, like the Surface laptop is the only one that really doesn't do that. They tried to with the Alcantara. But I think the Surface laptop is just a very nice but very boring laptop, because it's almost the perfect laptop, and you can't really do much to perfect that form factor at this point. Whereas the Laptop Studio really tries to change the game and be different, and I really do like that it does that. And yeah, the staged thing, like I said, looks weird, but I think over time that will become a star selling point of this form factor on its own, I think.
Yeah, I think compared to Surface Book when that launched, which we were all very excited of. In fact, I just tweeted out how it was 6 years ago yesterday that was announced. And that was the biggest reveal ever. It was like none of us had predicted Surface Book at the time, or at least what it could do. We did hear that they were working on some kind of laptop, but it wasn't that. But then the reality sank in. So like when we got Surface Book, it was like, of course, they had the Skylake problems. You would close it, put it in your bag, it would overheat. That was a big thing. The Windows Hello was buggy for a long time. And the hardware itself was very underpowered. Like people say the Surface Book 3 was underpowered. Like, newsflash, Surface Book was literally a Surface Pro hardware. Outside they had a 1 gigabyte video like processor in there. Like this is more Microsoft doing. They're like, we made a custom GPU, custom NVIDIA. Like it was just like an off-the-shelf kind of part with 1 gig. It was barely anything. In fact, they had to come out with a performance version.
Yeah, I remember the performance base, and it had like a GT. It had a 960 in it, maybe, or 940M or something. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think it was one of those. You're right, and they made it was slightly thicker and all that kind of stuff.
Which is funny because they totally got rid of that thicker base with the version 2, which had a more powerful GPU and was still slimmer. I don't know how they managed that.
Yeah, and that was kind of the goal, right? That then they started ramping up to make it more powerful, but there were clear limits. But you know, as cool as Surface Book was, it didn't get really kind of good to Surface Book 2. And even Surface Book 3, but by then people had already been, you know, do we really need a detachable display? Are we actually using this? And of course, for a lot of people, it still wasn't powerful enough. And I wrote an article about that saying, you know, that's what happens when you put the CPU behind the display. Like they don't have a lot of room for thermals. But compared to that, Surface Laptop Studio is in a way better position. First of all, Windows 11 runs like a dream on it. I haven't had any crashes or bugs. Everything's worked as expected. The hardware, I get for some, is not powerful enough. Right. I'm here to tell you it's powerful. Like it's a like I'm using it to power 2 displays and an eGPU and a dock. Like it's very responsive. I almost couldn't tell the difference between this and like some of my desktop experience. And you mentioned the battery life. The battery life is very good. Like my battery tests were over 11 hours. And the 120 hertz doesn't seem to affect the battery life as much for whatever reason.
I think that's because the resolution, right? The resolution is quite a bit lower than the Pros, which I think is probably one of the reasons why they went for that, because the battery life is superb even at 120.
That's a very good point. It's a good part for the discussion. So we should mention the 120 hertz is default on the Laptop Studio, not 60. Of course, you can set it for 60, which kind of tells you something. Yeah, and we're complaining about, some people are complaining about the resolution, which, listen, when I'm looking in person, I don't see the pixels.
So when I should clarify, when I complain, I'm doing it sort of jokingly. Like the display is great. It's a great display.
But others have. Right.
Sure.
Others see those numbers, 3,000 by 2,000, whatever it was for book, and they're like, "Oh, it's lower." It's still very good, but you're right. So, why? Why did they do that? Well, one, they think this is good enough, and I would say it is. Like when I'm using this, I'm like, "This is an amazing display." Two, it's about what they can order and mass produce, because this is kind of a custom ordered screen. There's no other display on this on the market, right? But it also comes down to pricing. Had they gone a higher resolution, it would have been more expensive. It would have driven up that already expensive, $1,600 starting price. You know what? Now it's $1,700. I know it doesn't sound like a big difference, but they had they had a bottom line. They're like, it needs to start at this price and top at this. You start adding a higher resolution display, well, there you go. You're also going to kill the battery life. Because
Yeah.
as Zach says, you go to higher resolution, you're pushing more pixels, pixels, uh, or pickles. You're going to negatively affect the battery life. It's one reason people have argued against 4K in laptops. I still hear it to this day, like you don't need 4K, it's overkill. Well, some people really like 4K, but it is a huge hit on battery. But they seem to have found a balance, and that's something I keep stressing with Surface products. They're not the fastest. They're not the most performance. They don't have the most ports, but they tend to be the most balanced
Yeah.
of all that kind of stuff. Uh, the performance on this, I get it. It's not a gaming laptop, and you should not buy this if you're a gamer. I always have to have this discussion, but it's like if you're a gamer and you want to buy this, you better be able to justify that what the screens do and shifting around like that. Because if you draw a lot or want to use this posture, sure, okay. And it can game. Don't get me wrong. I was playing Destiny 2 at basically what would be a full HD resolution. I was hitting 90 frames per second, had no problem whatsoever. You drop it down to the full resolution, I was able to get between I think it was 45 and 60 frames per second on Destiny 2. Pretty awesome experience, if you ask me. But they do find this balance between battery life, processing ability, and design, right? Yeah, okay, you stick an eight core AMD in there or Core i9 Intel. Sure, okay. You just drove up the price by a couple $100. You just killed the battery life by a lot more. Those cores require power. And you made the device hotter. It's gonna have to run. That heat's got to go somewhere, and you probably made the fans louder to keep the fan noise. So there are trade-offs to this stuff. I know people are like, just stick it in, but that's not the answer a lot of times. And a lot of the things, with AMD, and they put AMD in this. Well, goodbye Thunderbolt 4. And I come back to that. I think more people would prefer to have if I just had AMD in it, I'm screwed. How am I running this through all this right now with the eGPU, right? You couldn't do that. Or actually, I have it right here if you're watching live. This here, I don't think Dell makes this anymore. This is an actual Thunderbolt 3 hard drive, external drive. And so it has like an SSD in it. It even has its own little fan when you plug it in. I was able to transfer 7.3 gigs of video files in 9 seconds using Thunderbolt 3 and 4 with this thing. Like if you're working in media, that's ridiculous, right? Imagine if you're transferring 50 gigs, because this is a terabyte, by the way, and you can get them with 2 terabytes. And you can buy Thunderbolt drives now, right? They're very common. Like you don't understand how slow it is if you just go back to Type-C. You can be like a quarter of that speed. So it makes a big difference to have Thunderbolt on these devices. And so I think it was the right decision. I don't know. What do you think about it? But I mean, have you had any issues at all with laptops?
No, I've had no issues. Okay, so maybe one issue that just pops in my mind. So I've had an issue with the trackpad where I'll go to click on something and the cursor will jump a few millimeters either to the left or the right or just in any direction. I don't know if it's just a defect of mine or if I don't know what it is. But every now and then I'll go to click on something and the cursor will just jump, like it moves slightly. Which, to be fair, it's not an issue unique to the Surface Laptop Studio. I have also seen that on the Surface Book before, so it's just happened more so on the Laptop Studio. Like it happened a bunch of times in the last 6 days, whereas on the Book,
that's
it maybe
something. There's something usually with good graphics.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. But yeah, otherwise, I'm in love with this device. Like I was. We should also talk about like the overall just size of it. Like it's a 14.4 inch display with very slim bezels. So it feels like a 13-inch laptop. Like it's no bigger really than a Surface Book 13.5. Like I was expecting it to be more closer to the Surface Book 15, and it's totally not. It's more towards the 13-inch one, and which really surprised me when I took it out of the box. In fact, when you can barely see it, but the boxes are there. When I took it out, when I had the box in my hand, I was like, "There's no way this laptop is in here." And you open it, sure enough, there it is, and it is very much smaller than it looks in photos, which I really like. It does feel more portable. It is it's on the heavier side. It's £4. Yeah, it is compact. It's a very dense laptop. And I do like that. Like it fits perfectly on my lap, and it doesn't look out of place. It doesn't look like this behemoth like the 15-inch Surface Book did, which I really do like. It is certainly a thick laptop. Don't get me wrong. You put it side by side with a MacBook Pro or something. Yeah, it wins in the chonky category. But
although it is I think slightly thinner than the Book 3 15-inch at its maximum.
That's true. Yeah. So the Book 3 had a wedge design, so it was thinner on one end and thicker on the other, whereas the Studio goes for just a completely flat top, so there's no wedge design to it. So yeah, but yeah, I really do like the design of this thing. I think it's great. The hinge mechanism, so the display hinge, I guess we'll call it, the one that allows you to enter stage mode, is what I will describe as a floppy hinge. There's no friction to it. And that's sort of surprised a lot of me. It surprised a lot of people, I think, as well, when they sort of got out of the box and tried it for the first time. People were expecting like a Surface Pro hinge, and that's not what this is. I'm sure they could do this with Gen 2 or Gen 3, but for Gen 1, it's just a floppy hinge. So it goes from laptops, and then really it's unusable until it hits stage mode, and then it's unusable again until it hits studio mode. Whereas I'm sure version 2 will have a friction hinge, which is good. Now you can have it at any angle, and then everybody cheers. But yeah, like that's one of those areas where they could very easily improve, and likely didn't add books, so it can be an improvement for Gen 2. Yeah,
it could be. I think it's also production, being able to. It's one thing being able to make that in the lab, and then be able to mass produce that, and / be able to mass produce that and hit that price point. That stuff takes time. It's the same reason like Elon Musk just talked about this week with Tesla. He got a lot of criticism. He says when they made the first Roadster Tesla car, it was like $130,000 or something like that. And he's like, people will be like, oh yeah, it's just what rich people need, another sports car. But he's like, but that's how you have to start. You have to start up there before you can mass produce. And now they make the Model 3, which is much cheaper in the $35,000 range, right? But that's how this technology works. So it takes a long time to be able to bring it down, be able to mass produce, and bring that level of quality. And we see that all the time in technology. We saw it with precision drivers. Precision drivers are just premiums, and now they're basically in all laptops. They actually have to be. But that was a price thing too, because it required better hardware. So yeah, so let's talk about how they can make it better. Of course, mine was be the anti-reflective layer. More ports, maybe. I don't use SD cards because I shoot with I forgot what they're called. They're XQD. They're like CF cards. They're much bigger, more robust. So I haven't used an SD card in years. So it's like I don't really care about this. But the rumor is Apple's going to bring back an SD card slot on its MacBook Pro line, right, for the 16-inch probably. So that seems like a little bit of an oversight to me. That would have made this a better media creation, and let's also hammer that. Who is this for? Well, Microsoft says it's engineers, it's scientists, data scientists, developers, designers, video and photo editing, social media people. That's who should be buying this. It's a very specific demographic. If you work in the STEM, fields, this is a great device for you. If you work in video photo editing, it's good for you. If you want the Core i5 version with no discrete GPU, that's good for people who want to be able to ink and draw, but they don't need the horsepower and all that, for more light creativity work. Anybody else, don't try to get that. We keep trying to talk Jez out of buying it. He has a Razer Blade Pro 17. And we're like, dude, just stick with that. You got enough power. He's like, I know, but I want it. Like, don't. So AR, maybe an SD card slot would be nice.
Yeah, the SD card is a curious one, because I think because Apple are rumored to be bringing back the SD card slot on their new MacBook Pro, and it's just weird to see Microsoft getting rid of it after hanging onto it for so long. Like, they were sort of crown kings for doing that. Like, oh yeah, but the Surface Book has an SD card reader, and now it's kind of like the headphone jack debate, right? Where whenever there's a new company that gets rid of a headphone jack, it's like, oh, there goes another one. But funny actually, did we mention that the Pro 8 has a headphone jack, but the Pro X doesn't? I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's because the Pro X is so thin. Like,
yeah, I guess.
There may be other things there, but yeah, and of course we also used to worry about Macs for only having a couple of Thunderbolt ports. This has less. I mean, a MacBook Pro has 4 Thunderbolt ports, at least the big one does. This only has 2. That's because of Surface Connect. So you have to think of Surface Connect, which is still here. Oh yeah, I should mention that too. Service Connect is basically a Thunderbolt, port
Yeah.
because it does the same thing. It just works with their dock, but it's the same bandwidth kind of stuff. So it's probably they could probably get rid of Service Connect and probably add another one or
Never
two.
do that. Surface Connect is amazing.
Yeah, so they will. And that was my other gripe was they shipped this with the 102-watt charger, which is fine. It gets the job done. But if you're going to game on this or do something with the GPU that's really intense, you can technically, again, slightly drain the battery while you're positively charging, So you'll lose about, when I was pushing it the hardest, around 2% every 10 minutes. That's not the end of the world. Even after an hour, you're down like what? Was it 12%? So it's 12 to 15% rounded up, right? Like that's not the end of the world, but it is a weird experience to be able to do that. You can use the 127-watt charger, but who wants to go buy that thing?
It's like $130 or something, right? It's well expensive.
You can get it for 90. You can get it for 90 on Amazon,
yeah.
But still expensive. So that was a weird thing. We'll see if people get bugged out by it. Yeah, other than that, I don't know what else I can change with it.
I think with Gen 2, we'll see what they did with the book, and they'll do a larger version. And I think that larger version may have a 6-core or maybe even an 8-core chip. And I think one of the reasons why they went 4-core with the 14-inch is because of the size, right? It is a 14, basically a 13-inch Ultrabook, just thicker. Whereas like the laptops you see with a 6 or 8-core chip in them is usually 15-inch and up. Like the Dell XPS 15, you can get with a 6 or 8-core chip, and that is a bigger device. So yeah, I think that's probably one of the reasons why they went for a 4-core for this one. And I think with Gen 2, we'll probably see a 16-inch version, which will have more powerful chips in them.
I have an editorial that's like 80% rent, which is basically that. It says, oh, you want a more powerful laptop studio? Wait for probably the 16-inch version. That'll come. Because that's the big thing right now is everybody's doing 16-inch designs. I could see them doing a 16-inch version. And then in that case, they could put in theory, a more powerful CPU. That said, they didn't do that with Surface Book.
True, they didn't. Yeah, but I think that was more...
It got a more powerful GPU.
Yeah. Maybe. Yeah, I think they were just... It wasn't the size of the display in width-wise. It was the thinness of it. That was the problem for the book line.
I think you're right. So, but we'll see. I'll be curious if they do a bigger version. But yeah, I guess in closing that out, I think Surface Laptop Studio is in a much better position than Surface Book was.
For like growth, I guess, for improvement down the line. Yeah, I agree with you.
And the price, I'm not going to criticize because it's Surface. It's always too expensive.
It matches Surface Book, right? The Surface Book started at $15.99 for the i5 without a GPU. But that also, I think, had 8 gigs of RAM. Yeah, it does have 8 gigs of RAM. That's unbelievable that they were selling that. With the Surface Book 3, with the Laptop Studio, it's an i5, and but with 16 gigs of RAM, no GPU. But 16 gigs of RAM is much more preferred over 8 gigs in this day and age.
And you can get this up to 32 gigs of RAM and up to 2 terabyte SSD. The SSD technically is user replaceable, but a little bit more tricky. We should mention the difference in the GPU. My voice is starting to go finally. You have the RTX 3050 Ti. That's the consumer version. It's fine for gaming. There's also the RTX A2000, which is what I have. They're basically the same. It's the same architecture. The difference is my clock rate for the GPU boost is slightly higher. And I believe this one also has error-correcting memory in it.
Brag ECC. About it.
Right. So ECC memory doesn't mean anything if you're a consumer. What it means, though, this is meant to run ISV software. This is basically certified software, CAD and engineering, 3D modeling, that's meant to run on specific hardware. And with the error correcting stuff, it's the idea when you're doing this kind of modeling stuff, you need to have these higher hardware specifications where you have less failures what are basically micro failures that can happen. So it's more engineered for that. If you're gaming, it doesn't matter at all. So don't worry about that. But that's kind of difference there with that kind of stuff. But it's a good thing that they're doing this because this is what you find in professional workstations. And if you work for a big company that has a lot of this expensive software, you need specific hardware for it to run on, and that's why that version exists. Um, Only available in the United States and Canada at the moment, unlike Pro 8, which is available, I believe, in 9 markets, expanding to 40 more in early 2022. Same thing with Laptop Studio. If you want it otherwise, you're going to have to import it. That's probably a combo of the chip shortage, which they flat out said, it's going to be an issue for us. But also, I think because it's a new form factor with this device, they want to scale up production, make sure they're not having failures.
They do this with every new form factor. If you've not noticed, right. Every single time there's a new sort of Surface form factor, they will. It's US only and Canada sometimes, I guess. And then over time they expand to more markets. And then with Gen 2, it launches in more markets. We saw the same with the Duo. We saw the same with the Surface Laptop when that first launched. And of course the Surface Pro when that launched 100 years ago at this point.
Yep. Someone's asking, can you charge by USB-C and Surface Connect at the same time? No device does that. Yeah, it's even with if you have 4 Thunderbolt 4 ports and you plug in 4 chargers, it
just explodes.
You don't get faster charging.
That's what happens.
Yeah. It uses whatever's like plugged in first, or I don't even know if it even selects higher. So not that it would matter anyway. You can only max charge on Type-C with 100 watts. You can max charge. Well, Surface Connect, technically, if you bought the 127 charger, you can hit that with there. So, but yeah, you don't get any benefit from doing
that. Shall we briefly talk about the Go 3 because we know you have one? Is it the best Surface Go yet?
So, I did the photos for this. I've done the benchmarks. I got to sit down and write it up now. It won't be a 5,000 word review. It's a pretty disappointing device, at least in terms of the Core M3. And we kind of said this before. The Core M3 version is maybe at most like a 10% improvement in performance. I think a lot of that is actually coming from the GPU. My overall PC Mark score seems to be slightly higher than the same Surface Go 2. The Pentium model should be significantly faster. That was like reported to be 60% faster. I don't have that. Zach may pick it up. Other than that, as far as I can tell, there's really nothing new. It ships with Windows 11. Okay. I haven't measured display accuracy yet, the colorimeter, so I'll still do that. Maybe it's slightly better. I'm not really holding my breath. The SSD is slightly faster for reads, dramatically faster for writes. It's like 2.5 times faster for writes. So there's an improvement there. But everything else, man, it's like exactly the same. So that's it. That's all I can say. It's funny because Zach is such a resolution snob, but when it comes to performance, he's like, no, Surface Go is fine for me. I pick up the Surface Go and I'm like, ugh.
Really?
It kind of makes me. It's gotten better. I mean, you really do got to wait for it to settle down and install stuff. And everything.
Yeah. The setup period is a little bit sluggish, but I think once it's done its business, I think the Go's fine. I've never had a complaint with it. It's a 10.5 inch device. What are you doing on a 10.5 inch device outside of browsing the web and writing something maybe?
True. So I'm still coming around to it. It's funny because I really do subscribe to the idea that the Go is actually a good tablet without the keyboard. I kind of like using it in that form factor more than I like using it with the keyboard. I mean, it's cool with the keyboard because it works surprisingly well, but it is a very cramped little tiny keyboard. It's literally at that like threshold,
it
like,
tiny.
Okay, I can use this. But if it was any smaller, you'd be like, no.
Yeah.
But it's not an amazing experience, but it's a convenient one. So I'm still mixed on Surface Go 3. I got to really kind of sit down more with it, which I want to do before I kind of write up the review a little bit.
It's honestly, it's more like a Surface Go 2 Plus, which I'm surprised they didn't call it 2 Plus, to be honest.
Yeah, you're right. And this gets back to, we wrote 2 editorials last week or something. One was, Surface Go should absolutely be an ARM device. And everybody says that on this podcast, right? And then I wrote, here's why it's not an ARM device. And the fact is, like, the 7C Gen 2 that they would use in this, in my opinion, kind of sucks. Like, it's okay. It's almost there. But I couldn't say it's much better than the Intel version. You get a little bit better battery life, which is kind of nice. I think the next gen ARM, whatever they do, could be the one that they maybe do for a Surface Go X. It'll make more sense, but they're just almost there. Likewise for Intel, I don't know what they're doing, like how the Pentium is going to improve anymore, because it is still a bottleneck on this device in terms of just overall performance. It's just, I feel like you have to settle. And you have to settle if you want to go with ARM at that price point, or you're going to have to settle if you go with Intel at that price point. And then AMD is nowhere to be found because they don't make, as far as I know, a fanless design. So I don't know. This is where Qualcomm's got to enter, NVIDIA, Samsung. There's a rumor this week that Microsoft is teaming up with AMD to work on its own ARM processor. We'll see if that's true. I just love it because people are like, Microsoft should make its own processor. It's like, they're not. They're going to go to AMD, be like, hey guys, can you make one for us? And then AMD doesn't even make its own chips. AMD also just designs them. AMD goes to TSMC then to make their chips. It's all a weird thing. The only company that really does is Intel. Intel does design its own chips and actually makes its own chips. Everybody else, Apple doesn't make its own chips. Apple designs its own chips. It requires TSMC to make them for them. Because making a foundry, to put it in perspective, Intel is opening a new foundry in Arizona, just started a week or two ago, building. It's going to take, I think, 2 to 3 years to build. It cost $20 billion.
Jesus.
So when people are like, why doesn't Microsoft just open a foundry? Like, are you insane? It's $20 billion to open one. And then that would take, and they wouldn't even be able to build it in 4 years. And they don't quite have the expertise to build a foundry. So like, what makes you think, people are ragging them on Windows 11 not being finished. What makes you think they can just come out the gate and build a processor that beats Intel and AMD on the first try?
It took Apple 10 years to get to where it is. Yeah.
Yeah, I always bring that up because people are like, the M1. I'm like, why didn't they do the M1 in 2017? Was there no market for it? Would MacBooks not have been cool to have an M1 in 2017? Why it took them to 2020? Because it's hard. It took 10 years of chip development to get to the M1. Don't forget that. Yeah, they're there now, and good for them, and they're doing a good job with it. But why didn't they do it earlier? So this stuff is going to take a long time. But I don't know what the answer is with the Surface Go. I'd like to see it get a little bit better performance.
Yeah. I think for its demographic, which I think is really aimed at students, young people, it's fine. It does the job. People reviewing the Go, tech pundits, enthusiasts, journalists, whoever you want to call them, who are also review the high-end, powerful laptops and desktops and whatnot. So when they do have when a Surface Go is thrown in front of them, they sort of look at it and go, "What the hell?" Whereas majority of people in the world don't have that same sort of access to every kind of laptop and power level out there, and the Surface Go for them is more than acceptable in what it can do performance wise.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, and a lot of people seem happy. I would also say there's really no device like this on the market, right? Although HP's coming out with their 11-inch version.
The closest thing I think is an iPad, the cheap one, like the 10.2 or 9-inch, whatever it is. That iPad is the closest thing. But I think they're very different form factors. They're both tablets, don't get me wrong. But the Go certainly does the laptop aspect of that much better than that specific iPad, because that iPad has the really crappy keyboard accessory, which just makes it's not fun.
It really is.
Sorry, what did you say?
I know, I was going to say it really is. I don't really like those keyboards. I should also mention, people always compare Surface Pro 8 to the iPad Pro. That's fair.
Yeah.
I was surprised looking at the battery benchmarks for iPad Pro 12.9. At 80% brightness, it gets around 5.5 hours of battery life, 6 hours, and then like at 50%, it gets 8.5 hours. Like
those are laptop battery levels.
Yeah, I mean that's okay, but and Apple only guarantees 10 hours, right? That's their marker for that. That's not miles ahead of the Pro 8, though. Like, I was actually surprised where, this idea that the iPad Pro is just going to last you 6 weeks on a single charge. I'm like, those days are over, man. I will say the iPad Mini, though, has gained a lot of interest. Like, and
the new iPad Mini is great.
So, people are going to kind of compare it there, and they still definitely have an advantage with that in terms of
They
hardware.
are the only company really pushing 8-inch tablets at
Right.
this point, right? That everyone else is giving up on that.
Yep. But yeah, HP has their HP 11-inch tablet. That's its name. It's coming out in December. That also only has a Pentium processor, though, not even the Core M3. So who knows? But that has a cool 13 megapixel flippy cam that is going to be really neat. And it can mount in a vertical position with the keyboard. I think that's going to be a fun device. But again, I'm a little worried about the performance on it. But they're kind of positioning it more as a companion PC than a full standalone. I mean, you can use it as a standalone, but I don't know. They got to solve this processor stuff. But yeah, Surface Go 3. It's the best Surface Go yet.
I think it's fair to say
true.
If you have a Surface Go 2, you probably don't need a Surface Go 3.
That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
The only upgrade path there is you have a Surface Go 2 Pentium going to a Surface Go 3 with the M3 processor, or the Core i3, whatever it's called.
That'd be a big jump. Yeah.
That'd be a nice upgrade.
Yeah. Or if you're going from a Go 1 with those big bezels to the Go 3, that'd be a nice upgrade for you as well. And what's really nice is that they've not changed the size of it or anything. So the keyboard that you bought for your Go 1 will work on the Go 3.
Yeah. Oh, well, we'll see. We'll see what happens with the Go line. Maybe next year we'll get a Qualcomm version.
Yeah.
But those Qualcomm chips need to get better before that happens. Surface Slim Pen 2, you want to quickly talk about that?
Yeah. So the Slim Pen 2 is an interesting bag. It has haptics in it and stuff, which Microsoft has sort of talked about to no end. I'm not all that convinced on the haptics. They are very subtle, even at 100%. Like, you have to really sort of want to feel it. They are there, and I guess they do enhance the experience in some ways, but I was unconvinced, really. I wouldn't be upset if they weren't here, put it that way. There's room for improvement here. It's certainly early days for it, I think. The idea is that the slight vibrations can make it feel like you're writing on paper, or it can give you different textures for the different kinds of brush you're using and stuff. And I guess, sure, it does sort of do that, but I really don't think it enhances the experience all of that much. I do have the first Surface Slim Pen here as well. And interestingly, I don't know if you can hear this. If you listen to the Slim Pen 2, you can sort of hear it sort of vibrating, right? The Slim Pen 1, solid.
Yeah. I
don't know what... I guess they had to make room for the vibration motor itself, but the Slim Pen 2 definitely feels, I guess, more flimsy. I wouldn't say it feels flimsy, but... It rattles. Compared to the Slim Pen 1, which feels like a tank, the Slim Pen 2 does not feel like a tank, I don't think. Which I guess is the drawback of them having to fit in a vibration motor on the inside to get that functionality working. That said, the actual pen tip is much sharper and slightly longer. It has a longer nose to it, which I actually really like. It makes my handwriting nicer. I don't know how, but it does. So yeah, those are sort of... Other than that, the designs are more or less the same. They both fit in the same... charging cradle. So this is the charging cradle for the Slim Pen 1, and the Slim Pen 2 fits in there just fine, as you can use the Slim Pen 1 and put it on the Surface Laptop Studio or the Surface Pro 8's keyboard, and it will charge there as well. So they are interchangeable with the charging cases, which also means, I believe, that the Slim Pen 1 will connect to the Duo 2's pen case and charge on there as well. So you don't have to buy a Slim Pen 2 to get that functionality if you already have a Slim Pen 1, which is nice. The other minor change they've made is the side button on the Slim Pen 1 was on the side, quite literally, and now the side button's on the front of the device. Now, that's technically the front button, I guess. But that's basically all of it. Oh, and if I can show you, the actual pen tips, if you look at that, are 3.5 millimeter headphone things. Don't know if you knew that or not, but yeah, they plug in there, and that's how they connect, and there you are.
What happens if you stick it into the headphone jack?
You know what? I don't know.
You know what's going to happen? You won't be able to get it out.
Yeah, it'll be stuck. So let's not do that.
Like time, I'll never forgive Zach. He's like, dude, take the Surface Book 2, the display, stick it on Surface Book 3.
And
what happens?
Great idea. Let's do it.
I did it, and it reversed the magnets, and I couldn't get it off. I had to
manually release them.
Yeah, eventually I did, but it still never worked the same after that.
It was scarred.
Yeah. I like the Slim Pen too. Like I said, the haptics aren't night and day difference, but I like it. It adds just a little bit of feedback. I think it's something they can improve upon. But as a first gen, I think it's a cool idea, and I think it does help better simulate inking and writing, and you haven't really tried it on the Photoshop apps
No,
where
yeah, I
like the
tried it
lasso
in
tool.
Whiteboard and Sketchable, and it does
Yeah,
a
because
little bit there, but not much.
yeah, it's crucial to know it only works in certain apps.
Yeah.
I have a list of them in the review, but basically does need to add support for it. So it doesn't work across the board, but it works in most of Microsoft's apps, except OneNote, ironically, but I'm sure that'll be happening. But a lot of Adobe apps support it too. And Adobe has it where, of course, it works with the brushing and stuff, but if you use the lasso tool, and has a little grab points, as you approach the grab points, it vibrates to let you know, and you can just grab. And it really does speed up um, the usage of that function. It's kind of hard to explain. The whole thing is hard to explain, but I like it. I'm glad they did it. I'm sure it'll continue to improve. But yeah, well, guess that's about it. Um, I don't know. Anything else to say about the reviews? Anything else?
I think that's all. I guess briefly we can mention the Ocean Mouse, which I do have here.
Um,
Don't buy this. It is a $20 mouse, and boy, do you feel every dollar. It is a very cheap, very small, not very ergonomic mouse. And even I think that like it doesn't even feel that responsive. I was trying to use it the other day, and the cursor just feels like it lags behind your movement. So, not my favorite mouse, but it is 20% recycled. So I guess well done, Microsoft. What a raving review.
Yeah. Regarding Surface Duo 2, I don't have any information for you.
It's coming.
When we get it, I assume just going Surface reviews, they'll go live on the day Duo 2 goes on sale, which is the 21st, I believe. So pay attention. I'm not being coy. I don't have it, so I'm not lying. But I'm sure we'll have something soon for that. So that's the next big thing. And then maybe I could finally take a break. I guess we'll do some Q&A now with the audience if we haven't already answered anything. But yeah, make sure you go to Windows Central for those reviews. And of course, I'll be doing, like I said, the Pro 8 SSD upgrade. I'll be talking about the Pro 8 and Laptop Studio with an eGPU, as well as a Thunderbolt 4 dock, and what that experience is like, and whether or not you should consider it. I think there's a lot of interest in that. And of course, the deep dive on the haptic trackpad and technology around that. So, and then Zach's going to share his own opinions on the Laptop Studio. Of course, he's already kind of done that, but
yeah,
sounds good. All right. Well, if you want to follow us on Twitter, follow me, Daniel_Rubino, RUBINO, BINO. I can almost do my name. Follow Zach at ZACBOWDEN. And of course, we'll be live next Friday, 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, normal on youtube.com and our Windows Central channel. You can feel free to join us there for the live chat. As always, thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Take care, everyone.
Boy, 2 hours. That might be our longest episode yet.
Yeah, I'm feeling it. It just kind of hit.
Yeah, you just died at the end there. Just
I really did.
I'm over it. So yeah, we'll hang around for a few minutes for questions because we have been here for a long time now, and I'd like to start my weekend considering I have tomorrow off. So
Must be nice.
Does Windows 11 require secure boots, or can you run without it? It officially requires secure boots, but there are workarounds for you to install it without secure boots. But it will be in an unsupported state, which Microsoft guarantees no security updates and so on and so forth. So do at your own risk. Do you think Windows 11 needs a Windows 10 mode, as Michael Muchmore from PC Mag suggested? I think the Windows 10 mode he's asking for is called Windows 10. that exists. It's already in OS, and you can install it today if you really want. And look, that's the thing, right? Like the problem Windows has is that people always want Microsoft to bring forward all of the stuff it added in the past, and that's why Windows got into a position where it was with Windows 10, because Microsoft couldn't give up the past. They couldn't let go of things that some people used and some people didn't use. They just kept it all for legacy purposes. Microsoft is finally in a position where they're feeling bold enough to say, no, we are cutting off support for this, and this because it's time to get over it and move on. Live tiles is a perfect example of that. I see people asking for live tiles to come back all of the time. Live tiles didn't work. Developers didn't really adopt them. They were convoluted and confusing to configure on desktop. They really sort of survived way longer than they sort of needed to. They should have really died out with Windows 8, to be honest. But they carried them through to Windows 10 and tried to push them as much as they could. Nothing ever came of it. And they finally worked up the courage to say, right, let's just get rid of that because it doesn't work. And that's where we are today with Windows 11. And a lot of people are now here. We're at that point where people are saying, oh, why don't they add like the live tiles as an option? Or why don't they do... They don't do it because that's how Windows fell into what it was with Windows 10. They're finally trying to cut off that baggage where they can.
Did you try Surface Dock 2 into Surface Laptop Studio? Will it give the full power? I don't know if I have a Surface Dock 2 here. But yeah, it works. It works fine. I've seen people doing it. They can run dual displays, powering it, all that kind of stuff. It's not a problem. The problem comes when you want to use the GPU for extended durations, I imagine. But
do you think Microsoft will ship new features to Windows through cumulative updates and feature experience packs through the next year, or will they wait until 22H2? It's a good question. I don't really know the answer. My best guess is that they will do it for small things. But for big new features, they will wait for 22H2. The only exception to that for me is Android app support, because I already know that they're testing that on 21H2 internally. So that could show up, but they could also save that for 22H2 as well. For Laptop Studio, while on your lap and charging, does the base get warm/hot? It will get a little tiny bit warm. Like it's not noticeably concerning or anything. But yeah, like there's a slight warmness to it.
Do you think if Microsoft came out with a mini Surface, they already did, it's Surface Go, like iPad mini, it would be successful? Like I said, I think Surface Go already fills that role. Panos has been pretty clear that anything below 10 inches isn't Windows territory, so they're not going to do it. That's sort of why Android's on the Duo 2 and Duo 1. Anything over 10 inches is Windows. That's how he sees it. I don't think you can make the Go any smaller. The Mini is its own thing, you know. Is there a reason why Surface Pro 8 did not get a rounded corner screen? Yeah, it's a good question. I don't have an answer to that. It's true, Surface Laptop Studio does get rounded corners and looks awesome. I don't know why that is with Pro 8. I imagine it's a manufacturing thing.
I think it's actually more just the design teams are different, and they both went with different choices. Because the one, I think a lot of people don't realize is that although it is one Surface team, the different product teams, there are different product teams. There is a book team, and there is a laptop team, and there is a pro team. Like, they aren't the same team. So I would guess it's just the one of that team decided that they didn't want it, and that's how that was.
Do we think next year we'll get a Surface Go more in line with Pro X? I think they could definitely do a Surface Go X next year. It'll be dependent upon Qualcomm releasing new chips. I do expect Qualcomm to announce new processors around December. Their Gen 3s, basically, an 8CX Gen 3, along with an 8C and 7C Gen 3. Those don't go, historically, wouldn't go into production to devices till mid-year. And then that gives Microsoft a few months for next October, right, or September, to be like, here's a Surface Go X running a Gen 3. Because the Gen 3 stuff, of what my thinking is correct, is going to be a big shift for these chips. They're not just like, oh, it's 150 megahertz faster. It's going to be a platform shift to what the Snapdragon 888 is kind of based on. And you're going to get a different design. So the names might not be radically different, but the performance should be. And I think if that happens, the 7C Gen 3 could make much more sense for Surface Go X. And then you would get a thinner device, lighter device, maybe. They could change to the design. And you might see what happened with the Pro series. That then becomes the new feature, cool one, thinner bezels, maybe larger display, thinner design, longer battery life. And then the Surface Go 4 comes out later with a major redesign, right? That could happen.
Do you think the alleged Qualcomm CPUs in December will be competitive with Apple for 2022?
No.
I think they'll certainly close the gap, but it won't be to the point at which they're neck and neck. That won't happen until 2020, end of 2023 maybe, and that's because we're waiting for. What are we waiting for, Dan? There's a company that needs to get their
Nuvia.
Yeah, Nuvia. So who bought Nuvia?
Qualcomm.
Qualcomm bought Nuvia, and Nuvia are great apparently. So once they're folded in, that's when the chips will improve.
What Zach means is Nuvia was bought by Qualcomm for 1.4 billion back in January. The founders of Nuvia are the people who designed Apple's processors,
right,
including what led to the M1. That head engineer and two others broke off from Apple a couple of years ago, formed their own company to design chips, and were doing that. And then Qualcomm come and bought them. They were also getting sued by Apple, by the way.
Oh yeah, I was going to say there's certainly a lawsuit here.
Yeah, because what Apple was alleging was they left so they can start their own company, so they can sell back their technology to Apple. And what ended up happening was Qualcomm scooped them up and bought them.
Yeah.
So the very people who are designing Apple's processors now work for Qualcomm. That's the good news. The bad news is that it takes years to develop a chip and all that. They've publicly claimed, though, they're like, we can beat the M1. They said that.
Oh, yeah. Those are
Qualcomm
fighting words.
Yeah, they said they can beat it. But it's going to take a couple of years. But this is why I don't care about when people lament ARM on Windows. I'm just like, it's a journey.
Yeah.
It's not a sprint.
Our day will come.
Yeah, like they're getting there. And plus you have NVIDIA is getting back. They literally bought the designers of ARM. They're going to do their own. They're going to mix it with their RTX GPUs. You have Samsung with Exynos, supposedly teaming up with AMD. You have the rumor that Microsoft is working with AMD in this area too. It's going to get very competitive. So don't get fixated on the M1 stuff too much. The market's going to respond. This is not, Apple's not magic. They're not wizards, right? They just made a 5-nanometer chip. It's not that, insane. And I think Qualcomm will be able to beat them eventually.
How's the battery life been with your Pro 8? Mine was shorter than expected, 4 to 5 hours. Yeah, we talked about this on the podcast. It can vary. Mine is about yours. I've been seeing 5 to 6 hours, but check your brightness levels and whether or not you're on 120 hertz and stuff. Because obviously, if you're running your display at 90 or 100% with 120 enabled, that will severely zap your battery. So, yeah.
Yep.
Are there improvements on Surface Duo software and OS? We don't really know yet because Android 11 isn't here. Once the Duo 2 arrives in the next few weeks, we will certainly review the software aspect and talk about whether or not it's in a better position than the Android 10 was on Duo 1. And then hopefully, if there are many bug fix improvements on Duo 2, then those will sort of be recycled backwards to the Duo 1 to make that product better when Android 11 launches for it, which, people keep asking when is Android 11 for Duo coming. We don't have a date. It could be any time between now and the end of the year, apparently, according to Microsoft. So I've not heard of any internal dates for launch for that yet. So I don't know. I think probably next month is more likely, towards the end of next month.
You think Microsoft will eventually decide to sell Windows ARM licenses for end users and MacBook VMs? I don't know what the plan is there. Zach had some information about this. The reason why was because there's no compiled versions of Windows on ARM, right? They need to be compiled for each device kind of thing?
Yeah, so Windows for AMD and Intel, I guess, it has basic drivers which work universally, I guess, which is, you've seen it when like the UI is really big and moving at Windows around is really laggy and stuff because the basic driver does the bare minimum to give you a display and all the other sort of basic functionalities. On Windows and ARM, as far as I'm aware, there are no basic drivers for Windows and ARM. At least I've never seen a Windows and ARM device that can just boot an ISO without drivers preloaded. So what they would have to do if they were to sell you a Windows and ARM license, they would also have to provide you with an ISO with the drivers already slipstreamed that are correct for your device, and that would be a nightmare on Microsoft's behalf, because then they would have to create an ISO for every kind of ARM device, and then you'd have to choose it from a list. Because I don't think it would be fair for them to expect the end user to do that, because that's a pain in the backside. So yeah, that's probably why they don't do it. Yeah, the 20th anniversary Xbox controller looks great. Did you buy? I pre-ordered one. Yeah, I think it looks great. Do you think Microsoft may create a Surface with swappable RAM just like the SSD? No.
Oh no, I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. The RAM these days on devices like Surfaces and any sort of portable mobile device is soldered on, and the reason they solder it on is because it saves space. And every ounce of space or millimeter of space inside of a device is precious to any engineer. So I doubt they would waste room.
Yeah, and keep in mind the SSD is, it's a convenience thing. Oh, I can buy 256, upgrade to 1 terabyte. Cool. It's partly that a lot of it's security. A lot of it's driven by security, by which I mean if certain organizations want to send their device in for servicing, they can just pop out an SSD. like think of it, if you're like a major corporation, even a rival of Microsoft's, or you work in that same space, like you don't want to send in a corporate computer to them for the repair with all your potentially company stuff on there that may be copied off of it. So you can just literally pluck out the SSD and send it in. So it's kind of a security feature. RAM doesn't have that argument. You can't make a security argument for adding or removing RAM. Again, it's a convenience thing, but I think the argument will be buy the RAM you need now, not the RAM you may want in the future.
Why do you never discuss Azure? Because it's boring.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about? What happened in Azure this week that you want us to talk about?
Yeah.
Let us know. We'll add it to our roster for next week. Is there an alternative in Windows 11 for app folders in the Windows 10 start menu? No, there are no app folders on Windows 11.
Did you answer anything about the thoughts on Duo 2? Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Did I? I don't believe so.
Did you give your thoughts on Duo 2 when you saw it in person?
I made a couple tweets. I didn't talk about it on the podcast. Yeah, my impressions are the hardware amazing. Certainly an improvement over the Duo 1. The hinge feels great. The haptics feel great. The fit and finish much better as well. Like the Duo 1, if you look at a Duo 1, you can see the sort of glass on the outside very clearly just stuck on. Whereas on Duo 2, they're much more, they fit better. Like the edge of the glass curves into the frame of the device and stuff, which is just all standard things on other phones. But the Duo 1 didn't have that, and the Duo 2 does. So nice to see those sort of improvements. Can't really comment on the software because I didn't really have it for long enough. Hopefully it's better. What day of the week will you be streaming in the future? We will be back to Fridays going forward. It's just been the last couple episodes have been weird because we were sort of doing it for events and stuff. But next week we should be back to Fridays. As Dan just typed.
Have you received any Alder Lake laptops for review yet? Don't expect Alder Lake this year for laptops. Historically speaking, Intel releases desktop processors first, and then laptop versions 6 months later, maybe at least. Maybe we'll hear about laptop announcements at CES. I don't know. You will be hearing about Alder Lake announcements in the fall for sure. Intel's been pretty open about that, and there'll be desktops. I don't think we're expecting laptop stuff, unfortunately. So don't get mad at Microsoft for shipping 11th gen. I've never heard of any 12th gen laptops coming this year. Nothing's announced. I don't think you'll see a 12th gen laptop till late spring 2022. And that's being kind of optimistic, but we'll see. I mean, maybe Intel will surprise us.
Yeah, they'll probably be announced at CES, right? But you won't be able to buy them or get hands on them until a few months after.
Yeah.
Zach, do you know of any new form factor that Microsoft is preparing? Not a new form factor. I know there are new devices on the way, but technically not a new form factor. I mean, what are you referring to, like a watch or something? No, there's no watch coming.
Thoughts on the upcoming Pixel 6? I get what you did there. Hilarious. Regarding the Pixel 6, I think it looks really, really nice. I think the design looks great. I like the retro future vibe. I'm a big fan of it. The big thing, of course, it uses tensor processors, so it's a custom Google thing that they worked on. Should be powerful. I think it's going to be a really, really nice phone. I'm also completely kind of bored by it. Kind of like the iPhone. Zach asked it. He's like, "Oh, did you get the new iPhone?" Because I said I was thinking about doing it, and I got bored of the idea like a day later. Like, I feel like once I get Duo 2, once you go to these kind of new devices, like I have the Z Flip still, right? Once you go to these new form factors, it's hard to get excited for the iPhones and Pixels. I think they're going to be, I'm still tempted by the new iPhone just because, especially the Pro, because of the cameras and video. But I haven't, and it's not really a strong priority. I kind of feel that way about Pixel 6. I think it's going to be a solid phone. I'm curious about the pricing. I think it looks great, but I feel like I don't think I'm going to go buy one because it's just boring. But we'll see. Anything on Surface Studio 3, Zach?
Negative. Sadly not.
That's going to obviously, I think at this point, get a major redesign.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be completely.
I would guess that they had a Studio 3 lined up at some point for late 2019, 2020, and the pandemic sort of just stabs that plan in the heart. and they
it's kind of weird too, because desktops are becoming, and all-in-ones are more popular than ever. So I'm kind of surprised they're not.
I think their biggest thing is that they needed to find to lower the cost of entry, and I think their Studio 3 was not going to do that. I think that was still going to be very much a super premium device, and I think Microsoft in 2020 they had a problem with trying to. It looked bad trying to ship. It would have looked bad trying to ship a $3,000 desktop, $3,500 desktop. At the height of the pandemic. But, last year they did Laptop Go, right, which was like the cheapest laptop they've ever done. And then they did refreshes to the Surface. What did they do last year? They did the Surface Laptop 3. No, what did they do last year? The Pro X, wasn't it? And then they did Go 2 and Book 3. I guess they did Book 3.
Yeah.
Which I guess.
I'm also wondering with the pandemic, the focus on the webcam.
Yeah.
If they just decided to maybe redesign some aspects for the new kind of market. Just kind of like HP did with the NV34.
Could Surface Laptop 5 be one of the first Alder Lake laptops in the spring? I do not think we'll be seeing a Surface Laptop 5 until next fall. I could be wrong about that. But if it is spring, it won't be Alder Lake. Alder Lake will be fall at minimum for the laptop line. Zach, we love seeing your cats on the Surface videos. Please keep it up. They were certainly wondering what was going on. Just throwing boxes everywhere. They thought it was Christmas. Lots of people saying thanks for all of our coverage. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We do appreciate it. We work hard for you guys. So, we appreciate the kind words.
What's your choice as a daily driver laptop? Well, I think Zach and I have been both kind of living in the laptop studio. I've been jumping back between Studio and Pro 8. It's tough because it really sucks with this job. Like doing those battery rundown tests. I mean, if you think about it, those results, right? 11 hours and 45 minutes for one of them. That's 11 hours and 45 minutes I couldn't use the device.
He's just looking at it.
Yeah, and try doing that twice too, because I measured 60 hertz and 120 hertz. I had to do it twice. So like, there are portions of the review process where I just have to like use the other device and time it. I usually set it before I go to bed, right? But even then, I get up in the morning, and it's like, oh, it's still running, great. So It's one thing I love about wrapping the reviews. It's like, oh, now I get to actually sit down and just enjoy
It's
the
gonna be
device.
great when like we're at a point where devices have like 50 hours of battery.
God,
You
yeah.
gotta like not use it for
Yeah,
a
I'm
week.
not doing that rundown test. No thanks. But people do that with on YouTube. They do they set up their video cameras
Oh yeah,
and they just high speed it. Like that's
yeah.
insane.
All right, that's probably about it for today.
Yep.
Thank you all for tuning in. We will be back next Friday with a standard episode where we talk about news. But until then, follow us on Twitter and we'll keep you updated when we go live and all that good stuff. But until then, we'll see you next time.